Hey, welcome back to Omni Wizard. We've got something fire today. What if Harry Potter was raised by the Kents and returned to Hogwarts as Superman? Likes and subs keep us going. Alright, story time. Chapter 1, Smallville. The night sky over Godric's Hollow was on fire. Not literally, not yet, but that was how it felt to the handful of witches and wizards who lived on the outskirts of the village and happened to be awake at that particular hour. Something electric was moving through the air, the kind of pressure that makes dogs bark and birds abandon their nests, and ordinary people pull their curtains shut without knowing why. It was the feeling of something enormous happening very quietly in a house at the end of a lane, where a woman with red hair had just finished nursing her son to sleep. Lily Potter set Harry down in his crib and stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. She always did that. James teased her about it, said she was waiting to see if he'd open his eyes again, give her one more green-eyed look before morning. She smoothed the blanket across his chest and whispered something that wasn't quite a spell and wasn't quite a prayer, just the kind of words a mother speaks into the dark when she needs the dark to listen. Then the front door exploded. What happened in the next 4 minutes has been debated, analyzed, and mythologized in the wizarding world ever since. The broad strokes are these. Voldemort killed James Potter at the foot of the stairs. He killed Lily Potter in the doorway of the nursery. He stood over the crib and spoke the killing curse at a 13-month-old boy, and the curse came back at him like a thrown stone off a brick wall, and the most powerful dark wizard in a century was reduced to something barely worth calling a ghost. The house came apart at the seams. What the histories do not record, because no one was there to see it, is what happened to the boy. The crib with Harry still inside it was caught in the explosion and thrown upward through the roof on a column of wild, grief-charged magic. Lily's last spell had soaked into him like sunlight into soil, and it was still working, still wrapping around him, still determined. The crib disintegrated somewhere over Bristol. Harry kept going. He cried for a while, then he slept. He crossed the Atlantic at an altitude that should have been fatal, carried by something between magic and miracle, and the sheer stubborn refusal of the universe to end a story that had barely started. He came down in a field outside Smallville, Kansas at 3:47 in the morning in the middle of a meteor shower that had been lighting up the local news for 2 days. He landed soft. The field barely dented. Jonathan Kent found him 20 minutes later. Jonathan had been out checking on the cows. Something spooked them bad around 3, and he'd learned years ago to trust spooked cows when he saw the glow in the north field. He went out with a flashlight and a fence-post digger because Jonathan Kent was a practical man and found a baby sitting in a shallow depression in the dirt, wrapped in a scorched wool blanket with a lightning bolt-shaped cut on his forehead that had already stopped bleeding. The baby looked up at him with the greenest eyes Jonathan had ever seen and made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a question. Jonathan stood there for a long moment. Then he picked the boy up, tucked him against his chest, and walked back to the house. Martha was in the kitchen when he came in. She took one look at what he was carrying and sat down hard in the nearest chair. "John," she said, "I know. Is he?" "He's fine, he's perfectly fine." Martha stood back up, crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and took the baby from her husband's arms with the complete and immediate certainty of a woman who has wanted a child for a very long time and recognizes the moment when the wanting becomes the having. She held him up and looked at his face, and he looked back at hers, and they made their silent assessment of each other. "He's not from around here," Martha said. "No," Jonathan agreed. "We can't just, I know. But we can't just leave him, Martha." Jonathan put his hand over hers, the one holding the baby's back. "I found him in a field at 4 in the morning during a meteor shower with a cut on his head that's already healed. Whatever this is, it's ours now." Martha looked at her husband. Then she looked at the boy. Then she pressed her lips to his forehead, right on the lightning bolt scar, and said, "Hello, sweetheart, I'm your mom." They named him Harry Clark Kent. Because Martha insisted on the Harry, she said it suited him, she didn't know why, and Jonathan insisted on Clark, which had been his mother's maiden name. They filed the paperwork carefully, with the help of a sympathetic county clerk who owed Jonathan a favor and had learned not to ask too many questions about the unusual things that sometimes fell out of the Kansas sky. Harry Clark Kent grew up knowing he was loved. Everything else was negotiable. The powers came in slowly, the way most things did in childhood, one at a time, without warning, usually at the most inconvenient possible moment. He was 4 when he picked up Jonathan's truck. Not on purpose. He'd been trying to retrieve a baseball that had rolled underneath it, and he just sort of grabbed the bumper for leverage, and the whole truck had gone up like it was made of cardboard. Jonathan had come out of the barn to find his son standing in the driveway holding a Ford F-150 over his head with one hand, looking confused. He was 6 when his eyes started doing the heat thing. He'd been sitting in school, bored out of his mind during a lesson on state capitals, staring at the chalkboard, and then the chalkboard was on fire. His teacher screamed. Harry apologized. They agreed it had been a static electricity incident and never spoke of it again. He was 8 when he outran a tornado, not ran around. He'd been fascinated by it, wanted a better look, and before he'd thought about it, he was moving at speeds that made the corn stalks flatten sideways in his wake. He lapped the tornado twice before he remembered that probably nobody was supposed to see this and went home. Martha sat him down after each of these incidents with hot chocolate and the same gentle, serious voice. "You have gifts," she told him, "that most people don't have. That means you have to think before you act, not because the gifts are bad, but because other people scare easily and it's not kind to scare people." "Why do I have them?" Harry asked once. He was 9. Martha considered the question the way she considered every question Harry asked, like it deserved a real answer. "We don't know yet," she said, "but I think gifts like yours always come with a reason. You just have to be patient until the reason shows up." Jonathan's approach was slightly different. Jonathan took him out to the back 40 one Saturday morning when Harry was 10 and said, "Show me what you've got." Harry stared at him. "All of it," Jonathan said. "Everything you can do, show me." So Harry did. He ran fast enough to kick up a rooster tail of dirt that stretched 3 fields back. He lifted the harvester one-handed and set it down precisely. He actually floated, drifting upward like a soap bubble until he was 20 feet off the ground, looking down at his father with an expression of pure startled joy. He accidentally set a fence post on fire and then blew it out with a breath cold enough to frost Jonathan's coffee cup. Jonathan stood through all of this with his arms crossed and his face unreadable in the way that meant he was actually deeply moved but didn't want to show it yet. "Good," he said finally. "Good." Harry dropped back to the ground. "That's all you've got?" "I'm still thinking." Jonathan uncrossed his arms and walked over, putting a hand on Harry's shoulder. "None of this scares you." Harry thought about it. "Should it?" "No," Jonathan said. "That's exactly right, it shouldn't." He squeezed once. "You're my son, Harry. Whatever you are, you're my son, and my son doesn't hide from what he can do. He figures out how to use it right." Harry had never been afraid of his powers after that. They were as natural to him as breathing, more natural, probably, since he didn't technically need to breathe in quite the same way ordinary people did. He was fast and strong, and could see through walls and hear conversations happening 3 miles away when the wind was right. And he'd learned to manage all of it with the relaxed competence of someone who'd had 11 years of practice. He was also, it turned out, extraordinarily good at school. Not in the showing-off way, he was quietly, thoroughly good, the kind of student who finished tests early and then spent the extra time drawing in the margins of his notebook. He had his mother's eye for detail and his father's stubbornness and some quality all his own that made people want to tell him things, made them feel like he was genuinely listening when he looked at them, which he was. He had 2 friends in Smallville, Pete Ross, who was loud and funny and had known Harry since kindergarten, and Lana Lang, who was sharp and kind and had once watched Harry lift a school bus full of children out of a ditch and then looked at him calmly and said, "I'm going to pretend I didn't see that and you're going to owe me a favor." He liked them both enormously. He was not exactly like them. That was okay. He was not, as far as he knew, a wizard. He was not, as far as he knew, famous. He was not, as far as he knew, the subject of an 11-year-old prophecy, the subject of 10,000 Wizarding World debates, the figure around whom an entire society had organized its hope and its grief for more than a decade. He was just Harry Kent, Smallville's most unusual resident, who could outrun the wind and had an inexplicable talent for spontaneous combustion. That changed on a Tuesday in July, 4 weeks before his 11th birthday. The letter arrived at 6 in the morning, carried by an owl. This was strange for several reasons. First, it was Kansas. Owls didn't typically do daytime delivery. Second, the owl had navigated directly to Harry's bedroom window, tapped on the glass 3 times with the authority of someone who had been given very clear directions and intended to follow them, and was now sitting on the windowsill giving Harry a look that communicated without ambiguity that it had not flown from Scotland to be kept waiting. Harry opened the window. The owl stuck out its leg. Harry untied the envelope, which was made of heavy parchment and addressed in emerald green ink to Mr. H.C. Kent, 2nd bedroom, Kent Farm, Smallville, Kansas, United States of America, which struck him as impressively specific. He brought it downstairs. Martha was already at the stove. She turned around, saw what he was holding, and went very still. Jonathan looked up from the table. Harry set the letter down in the middle of the kitchen. "Do you know what this is?" Jonathan and Martha exchanged a look. It was the look of 2 people who had been waiting 11 years for a specific conversation and had not entirely agreed on how to have it. "Sit down, sweetheart," Martha said. Harry sat. The owl settled on the curtain rod and tucked its head under its wing. Jonathan pushed the sugar bowl aside to clear space and folded his hands on the table. "There's something we should have told you sooner. We kept meaning to, we just wanted to wait until it was necessary," Martha said. "Which it is now," Jonathan said. Harry looked at them both. "Okay." Martha went to the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one that was always locked, that Harry had never opened because they'd asked him not to and he'd respected that, and came back with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She set it on the table and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a scorched wool blanket with a crest embroidered on the corner, a tiny pair of baby shoes, a broken pair of round glasses with wire frames, and a photograph moving alive, two people waving up at the camera with enormous smiles, of a dark-haired man with round glasses and a laughing woman with bright red hair and eyes the exact color of Harry's. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. "We found you in the Northfield," Jonathan said, "the night of the meteor shower. November 1st, 1981. You were wrapped in this blanket. You had that cut on your forehead. You were the happiest baby I'd ever seen," Martha said softly. "Despite everything, you just looked up at John and laughed." Harry touched the photograph. The woman in it waved at him, delighted, the way people wave when they've just spotted someone they love in a crowd. "Do you know who they were?" he asked. "We know some things," Jonathan said. "It took us a while to figure it out. The Wizarding World doesn't exactly advertise in the local paper, but Martha found references in some old books. James and Lily Potter, they were good people from everything we could find, and they were killed protecting you." "By a dark wizard," Martha said. "Someone called Voldemort, who was apparently stopped that night. By something that happened when the curse hit you." She paused. "The Wizarding World thinks you're dead or lost. They've been looking apparently, but not very hard, or not in Kansas." Harry looked at the letter. He picked it up and opened it. "Dear Mr. H.C. Kent, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." He read the whole thing twice, then he set it down and sat back in his chair. "Hogwarts," he said. "It's a school," Martha said, "in Scotland for witches and wizards, children who have magical abilities. And my parents went there." "Yes. And I'm meant to go. The letter seems to think so." Harry looked out the window. The morning light was coming in golden and sideways across the fields, the way it did in July, turning everything amber and unhurried. He could hear, if he concentrated, Pete Ross's radio playing 3 houses down. He could smell the coffee and the toast and the specific clean smell of the kitchen that meant home to him so deeply it was almost physical. He looked at his parents. "Tell me everything you know," he said. They talked for 3 hours. Jonathan had printed pages from some very strange internet forums. Martha had 2 library books about folklore that turned out to be more accurate than their authors knew. They covered what they knew of the Wizarding World, the war, Voldemort, the prophecy that had apparently named Harry as the one who would defeat him, and the scar on his forehead that was apparently famous in certain circles. Harry listened to all of it with the same focused attention he gave everything. He asked precise questions. He did not seem frightened. He did not seem overwhelmed. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I go?" Jonathan blinked. "To Hogwarts?" "Yeah." Yes, of course, it's your choice. It's always been your choice." "I want to go," Harry said. "Not because of the prophecy. I don't care about that." He picked up the photograph again. "'Cause they went there, because it's where I come from, because I want to understand that part of who I am." He looked up. "And because nobody's told the Wizarding World I'm alive yet, and I think it's going to be pretty funny when they find out." Martha put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright. Jonathan let out a breath that sounded like it had been building for 11 years. "Okay," he said. "Okay, then we're going to need a shopping list." The supply list from Hogwarts was extraordinary. Harry read it twice and then used his laptop to begin cross-referencing, because if there was one thing that came naturally alongside the super strength and the laser vision, it was thoroughness. 1 wand, various spellbooks, pewter cauldron, set of brass scales. He was writing notes before breakfast was finished. "Diagon Alley," Martha said, reading over his shoulder. "It says there's an entrance in London." "Through a pub," Harry said. "The Leaky Cauldron." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Appropriate." They booked flights to London for the following weekend. Harry told Pete and Lana he was going to boarding school in England, which was close enough to true that it didn't feel like a lie. Pete was devastated. Lana gave him a look that said she knew there was more to it and would be expecting the full story eventually. Harry hugged them both and promised to write. The week before they left, he went out to the back 40 alone at dusk and stood in the long grass with the sun going down behind the grain elevators, turning Smallville into a painting of itself, all gold and rust and shadow. He listened to the evening sounds. Crickets starting up, a truck on the highway 2 miles north, Martha's wind chimes on the back porch. He floated up slowly until he was 50 feet off the ground and just hung there looking at it all, the flat grid of fields stretching in every direction, the lights coming on one by one in farmhouse windows. He thought about James and Lily Potter who had died so he could live. He thought about how you owe something to people like that, not your whole life, not the thing of making yourself miserable on their behalf, but the thing of meaning something. The thing of being worth what they spent. He thought about what Jonathan had told him once when he was 7 and had asked why he had to be careful with his strength. Because you can do things most people can't, and that's exactly why most people need you to choose to be good. He'd been choosing ever since. Not because anyone told him he had to, because he'd looked at the choice and liked what he saw. He came back down and went inside for dinner and helped Martha set the table and listened to Jonathan complain about the tractor's fuel injector. And it was a perfectly ordinary evening, and he was glad for every minute of it. Because in a week he was going to walk into a world that had been waiting for him for 11 years, and he had no intention of disappointing it. London was loud and layered and smelled of rain and diesel, and something underneath both of those things that Harry couldn't name, something that pressed against the back of his teeth the moment he stepped off the plane, like a held note in a song he'd never heard but somehow already knew. Magic. The city was thick with it. He didn't say that out loud, because Jonathan was already dealing with the rental car and Martha was studying a tube map, and Harry didn't want to complicate the moment by announcing that he could apparently sense magical fields, which was a new development he hadn't expected and found extremely interesting. They found the leaky cauldron on a gray Tuesday morning. It was exactly as strange as advertised, tucked between a bookshop and a record store, invisible to anyone not looking for it, which Harry confirmed by watching 3 separate tourists walk past without a flicker of recognition. He stepped inside first, his parents behind him. The pub was dim and warm and full of the kind of people who wouldn't have looked out of place in any century from the 12th to the 19th. Witches in pointed hats, wizards in robes, a very old man in the corner whose long beard was doing something technically impossible near the bottom. Everyone seemed perfectly comfortable with all of it. The barman looked up. He had a vast, round face and the patient manner of someone who had spent decades serving the unusual. "Help you." "We need to get to Diagon Alley," Harry said. "Please." The barman looked at him. Really looked the kind of look that sees past the jeans and the trainers and the Smallville high baseball cap, and his eyes went to the scar, just visible above Harry's fringe, and something extraordinary happened to his face. "Merlin's beard," the man whispered. Harry had been warned about this. He'd figured it would happen. He still hadn't quite anticipated the moment when a total stranger looked at him and immediately looked like they might cry. "I'm Harry Kent," he said pleasantly. "I'd really love to see the alley if that's all right." The barman Tom, he introduced himself, with the slightly dazed quality of someone experiencing cognitive dissonance, brought them through the back. He tapped the bricks with his wand in a pattern that Harry watched carefully and memorized immediately. The wall opened. Harry stepped through. Diagon Alley opened up like a secret the world had been keeping. It was a cobbled street that seemed to go on further than the space it occupied should reasonably allow. Lined with shops whose windows contained things that had no business existing and existed anyway, robes in 17 colors, cauldrons of graduated sizes, a broom shop with a sleek new Nimbus 2000 in the window, and a dark little shop at the far end whose sign said Ollivanders, makers of fine wands in peeling gold letters. People moved through it all with the comfortable ease of those who'd never had to pretend this was anything other than normal. Harry stood very still for about 4 seconds. Then he smiled, wide and genuine, the smile he got when something was better than he'd expected. "Okay," he said. "I like this place." Martha had hold of his arm and was looking around with the open delight of someone who had waited 11 years to know that the world was this strange. Jonathan was watching everything with careful attention, the way he watched anything he needed to understand before he could trust it. They went to Gringotts first. The Potters had left a vault, the letter had mentioned it, tucked in a postscript, and the process of establishing Harry's identity involved a goblin peering at him through a magnifying glass for a disconcertingly long time before declaring, with the grudging respect goblins reserved for truly exceptional cases, that the magical signature was conclusive. The vault was stocked with gold that Harry had no frame of reference for in terms of how much it represented, and he converted some to British pounds for his parents and kept the rest in wizarding currency, which jingled pleasantly in his pocket. The shopping was extraordinary. He was measured for robes by a woman who seemed to be taking 17 measurements simultaneously. He bought his books, 5 of them, and he'd already started on the first by the time they reached the apothecary. He watched a demonstration of the self-stirring cauldron and bought the regular one because it seemed more educational. Ollivanders was last. The shop was narrow and dusty and full of small boxes stacked to the ceiling, and Mr. Ollivander materialized out of the shadows with the silent certainty of someone who is always exactly where he intends to be. "I wondered," the old wandmaker said, looking at Harry with eyes like pale moons, "when you might come in. You were expecting me. I was wondering, there is a difference." He studied Harry for a long moment. "I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Kent, Harry Kent." Ollivander tilted his head. "Indeed, and yet the wand signature," he trailed off, his expression shifting into something between fascination and calculation. "Your mother's wand was willow, 10 1/4 inches, swishy, excellent for charms." Your father's was mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, good for transfiguration. He paused. You are something altogether different, I think. He brought boxes out, many boxes. Harry tried them in the way Ollivander directed. A wave, a flick, and boxes flew off shelves and books shot across rooms, and a feather duster animated itself and tried to clean the ceiling. Ollivander's expression grew progressively more interested. Remarkable, he kept murmuring. Simply remarkable, most unusual. The wand that chose him was the last one in the last box. 11.5 inches holly with a phoenix feather core, and when Harry wrapped his fingers around it, a wave of warmth moved up his arm and out through the shop, and all the unsettled objects around them fell gently into order. Holly and phoenix feather, Ollivander said softly. The phoenix who gave this feather gave only one other. He paused. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar. Harry processed this. The wand that tried to kill me and the wand I'll use to defend people are brothers. Curious, isn't it? Yeah, Harry turned the wand in his fingers. It felt exactly right, the way a perfect tool feels, balanced, responsive, like an extension of something that was already there. I think I can work with that. The night before he left for Hogwarts, Jonathan came into Harry's room and sat on the edge of the bed the way he had when Harry was small and couldn't sleep. Harry was packing not badly, actually. He was an efficient packer, and they were quiet together for a while in the comfortable way of people who don't need to fill silence. You're going to blow their minds, Jonathan said. Harry grinned at his suitcase. Probably. There are going to be people there who have opinions about who you are, who they think you should be. I know. And, Harry folded a pair of jeans with probably more precision than was necessary. And I know who I am. He looked up. You made sure of that. Jonathan nodded slowly. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out a small folded piece of paper that he'd clearly been carrying for a while, worn soft at the edges. He held it out. Harry took it. It was a photograph, not a moving one, an ordinary Kansas photograph of the four of them at Christmas 3 years ago. Jonathan and Martha and Harry, all of them making faces at the camera, snow in the yard behind them, the farmhouse lit up in the background. In case you need to remember where home is, Jonathan said. Harry looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he folded it and tucked it into the breast pocket of his jacket, right against his chest. I always know where home is, he said, but thank you. They left for the airport at 4 in the morning. Martha packed sandwiches and pie for the flight. Jonathan drove with the windows down despite the cold because Harry liked the air, and they came down into London in the early grey, and Martha held Harry's face in her hands on platform 9 at King's Cross and looked at him so hard it felt like she was memorizing him in case the world moved too fast. Call us, she said. The professor said owls work internationally and we bought you a top-of-the-line owl so there are no excuses. I'll call you every week. Good, she smoothed his collar. You've got your lunch, Martha. Your father packed the pies 3 pieces because you eat like Martha. She took a breath. You are going to be magnificent, she said, precisely and with complete conviction. Obviously, Harry said, and she laughed, and he hugged her so hard she made a small surprised noise and then hugged him back just as hard. He shook Jonathan's hand and Jonathan pulled him in and said nothing, which communicated everything. Then Harry picked up his trunk, settled his owl carrier over one shoulder, and turned to face the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. On the other side of it, a train was waiting that would take him to a school full of people who knew his name but not his face, who thought him a ghost or a myth or the ending of a story, and who were about to find out that the story had barely started. He walked through the barrier without breaking his stride. The Hogwarts Express was brilliant red and exhaling great comfortable clouds of steam, and the platform was loud with families and owls and the good chaos of 100 children starting something enormous. Harry stood there for a moment and took it all in, the smell of the engine, the sound of laughter, the specific excited noise of people stepping towards something they couldn't quite see yet. He breathed in. He felt the magic in the air, dense and layered and old and extraordinary. He felt in his bones and his blood and whatever strange Kryptonian enhanced everything he'd been born into, the absolute certain knowledge that this was exactly where he was supposed to be. And he was exactly who he was supposed to be. And the next few years were going to be, what was the word? Interesting. He found an empty compartment, stowed his trunk with one hand, and sat down by the window as the platform began to thin and the whistle blew. The train started moving. Harry Kent watched England begin to scroll past the window and felt something in his chest that he thought might be the particular joy of a person standing at the beginning of something they've chosen, not something they were forced into, not something they stumbled into, but something they walked toward with their eyes wide open. He thought about his parents in the moving photograph. He thought about Jonathan's voice saying, "You're my son." He thought about the wand in his pocket and the magic he could feel humming in his blood and the scar on his forehead that apparently the whole world knew about. He thought, let's see what comes next. Outside the window, England rushed past in shades of green and gold, and somewhere ahead of them, beyond the hills and the miles and the particular magic of moving forward, Hogwarts was waiting. Harry Kent was on his way. Chapter 2, The Boy the Hat Couldn't Place. The compartment door slid open about 20 minutes outside London, and a boy with red hair and something on his nose that might have been dirt or might have been a freckle. It was genuinely hard to tell where the freckles ended and the dirt began, leaned in and said, "Sorry, everywhere else is full." "Can I?" "Yeah, come in," Harry said. The boy dragged an enormous trunk through the door, nearly took out a ceiling light with the end of it, apologized to the ceiling, and dropped into the seat across from Harry with the relieved collapse of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Harry Kent." Ron blinked. Something flickered across his face, not recognition exactly, more the sensation of almost recognition, like hearing a song you can't quite name. His eyes moved to Harry's forehead, where the fringe covered the scar but not perfectly, and the almost recognition sharpened. Then he seemed to decide he was being ridiculous and stuck out his hand. "You American?" "Kansas," Harry said, shaking it. "Born in England, raised in Kansas. Long story." "Right." Ron seemed to file this away as interesting but not his business. "You know about, I mean you're going to Hogwarts, so you must know about magic." "Yeah." "First generation?" Harry considered the question. "It's complicated." He looked at Ron. "You..." Ron's expression shifted into something between pride and exasperation, the particular look of someone who has many older siblings. "6 older brothers, mum and dad, both grandparents on both sides. I'm basically drowning in it." He paused. "Bill was head boy. Charlie played Quidditch for England. Percy's already going on about being a prefect." Another pause. "The twins are mental geniuses, but nobody in the family admits it because they keep blowing things up." "And you?" Harry said. Ron shrugged, a little too casually. "Just Ron." Harry looked at him for a moment. "I doubt that." Ron didn't seem to know what to do with that, so he looked at Harry's owl instead. The owl, Harry had named him Archimedes, because the owl had a personality that strongly suggested he was the smartest person in any given room, opened one eye, assessed Ron, and found him acceptable. "Nice owl," Ron said. "He knows it," Harry said. They talked for an hour about everything and nothing Quidditch, which Harry had read about and found genuinely fascinating, and the moving photographs, which Ron found Harry's curiosity about hilarious, and American football, which Ron found completely baffling. Harry ate 2 of Martha's sandwiches and 1 piece of pie and offered Ron half of everything, and Ron tried to refuse politely and then accepted because Martha's pie was the kind of thing you couldn't refuse twice. Ron was, and Harry clocked this quickly, the way he clocked most things, genuinely funny without trying to be. The kind of person whose humor came from how sharply he saw the world rather than from performing for it. He made an observation about Peeves the poltergeist, who apparently haunted Hogwarts and had once levitated Percy's prefect badge and given it to a cat, and Harry laughed so hard his tea nearly came out his nose, which had never happened before, and he found it embarrassing and also extremely funny. He decided immediately that he liked Ron Weasley. The decision required approximately no deliberation. The compartment door slid open again around noon, and a girl appeared who was still catching her breath and had a slightly frantic energy about her, like someone who has prepared very thoroughly for something and is now worried the preparation might not have been thorough enough. "Have either of you seen a toad?" A boy named Neville's lost one. "No toad," Harry said. She assessed them both rapidly. "First years," they nodded. "Good, me too." She came in because she was clearly the kind of person who made decisions quickly. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all our course books already, most of them twice, and I've practiced some of the simpler spells, though wand work is obviously much more nuanced in practice than in theory. Have you tried anything yet?" Ron and Harry exchanged a glance. "I'm Ron. I know who you are. There are 6 Weasleys at Hogwarts. You're the youngest boy." She looked at Harry. "And you're..." She stopped. She looked at his forehead. Her eyes went very wide. "You're Harry Potter," she whispered. Harry had been bracing for this since Diagon Alley. He'd practiced his response, refined it, settled on something clear and not unkind. "Harry Kent," he said. "But yeah, same person." Hermione sat down hard. Her eyes were doing rapid calculations behind them. "You were missing. Everyone thought there are books about you, actual published books. I read one in Flourish and Blots last week, and it said the prevailing theory was that I was dead, that you were either dead or in hiding." She seemed to catch herself. "I'm sorry I'm staring. I know I'm staring." "It's okay. It's just," she got hold of herself with visible effort, "the way someone grabs a door in a high wind. It's quite a lot." "Tell me about it," Harry said pleasantly. "I found out 6 weeks ago." That knocked her sideways slightly. 6 weeks? You didn't know? "My parents, the people who raised me, they told me when the letter arrived." He said it simply, without drama. "I grew up in Kansas. My name was Harry Kent. Nobody told me I was famous until July." Hermione processed this with what Harry was starting to recognize as characteristic speed. "That's actually remarkable," she said, and she sounded like she meant it analytically but also with genuine warmth underneath. "You grew up completely outside the mythology. You don't have any of the—" She stopped herself again. "Sorry, I have a habit of thinking out loud." "Don't stop," Harry said. "What were you going to say?" She looked at him carefully. "I was going to say you don't have any of the weight of it, the expectation. Most children in your position, not that anyone's ever been in your position, would have been raised with the story. You'd have been shaped by it. But you weren't, so you're—" She tilted her head. "You seem very settled for someone who just found out their life is complicated." Harry thought about Jonathan on the back 40, saying, "Show me everything." He thought about Martha's voice saying, "You are going to be magnificent," with the calm certainty of someone stating a fact. "Good parents," he said. Hermione smiled, and it changed her face entirely, took it from precisely assembled to genuinely warm. "I'll take your word for it." She went to find Neville's toad and came back 20 minutes later with both Neville and the toad. Neville Longbottom was round-faced and earnest, and looked at everything around him with the expression of someone who kept expecting to be told he'd made a mistake being here, which made Harry like him immediately, and also made him want to find whoever had given Neville that expression and have a conversation with them. They rode the rest of the way to Hogsmeade together, all four of them, talking over each other in the specific comfortable way of people who have only just met but have somehow skipped the awkward part. Hogwarts appeared out of the dark across the lake like something that had been waiting for them specifically. Harry had read descriptions of it. He'd looked at sketches in 3 separate books. None of it had prepared him for the actual thing, the way it sat against the sky, towers lit from within, reflected in the black water below, enormous and certain and deeply, anciently magical in a way that pressed against him from 100 yards away like a warm hand. He felt it in a way he suspected the others didn't. Not better, just different. The magic here was old enough to have its own weight, its own gravity, and it responded to his proximity with a subtle vibration he felt in his back teeth and his sternum and the tips of his fingers. "Blimey," Ron breathed from beside him. "Yeah," Harry agreed. The boats took them across in small clusters. Harry's boat, him, Ron, Hermione, and Neville, who kept a death grip on his toad and looked at the castle with the expression of someone who wanted to love something and was afraid it wasn't going to love them back. The giant who led them, Hagrid, whose name Harry learned in approximately 30 seconds, because everything about Hagrid communicated itself immediately and warmly, had clocked Harry on the platform with the same expression Tom the barman had deployed, but had handled it differently. He'd gone red and his eyes had gone bright, and he'd made a sound like "oh" and then said, in a voice like thunder pretending to be gentle, "Blimey, Harry, you've got your mum's eyes," which was the first time anyone had said that to him and which Harry found he had no prepared response for at all. He stood at the front of the boat and watched the castle get closer and felt something he couldn't entirely name, not homesickness exactly since he'd never been here before. The opposite of homesickness. The recognition of somewhere you haven't been yet but somehow already belong. He thought, "Hi mums, hi dad, I made it." Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the brisk authority of someone who has managed the chaos of 11-year-olds for a very long time and developed a comprehensive system for it. She was sharp-eyed and straight-backed, and assessed Harry with a look that went several layers deep in about a quarter of a second. She didn't say his name out loud. She filed it away with the practiced discretion of someone who understood exactly what saying his name out loud in this entrance hall would do, and Harry appreciated that more than he could express in the approximately 4 seconds of eye contact they shared. "The sorting will begin in 10 minutes, she told them all and swept out. The entrance hall was huge and lit by floating torches and smelled of something ancient and stone-cold and specific, like the inside of a library that had been slowly absorbing the thoughts of everyone who'd ever used it. Students were filing past from the main doors, older ones, heading to the Great Hall, and some of them glanced at the cluster of first years with the comfortable superiority of people who have already survived something and enjoy the reminder. A pale boy materialized at Harry's left elbow with the practiced ease of someone who has decided to make an impression. Draco Malfoy was, Harry absorbed him quickly, expensive. Not just in the obvious sense of robes and posture, though those were present. In the deeper sense of someone who had been told from birth that they were a particular kind of person and had organized everything about themselves around that information. His hair was very blonde and very arranged. His expression was the expression of someone who has decided in advance that most things will fail to interest them. He looked at Harry the way he probably looked at everything, measuring, comparing, categorizing. "You're Potter," he said. "Kent," Harry said. A flicker of something recalibration maybe moved across Malfoy's face. "Draco Malfoy." He stuck out his hand with the air of someone extending a significant privilege. Harry shook it with the simple friendliness of someone who shakes everyone's hand and doesn't attach hierarchy to the gesture. Draco seemed unsure what to do with this. I can help you, Draco said. Navigate things here. There are families worth knowing and families best avoided. He slid a glance at Ron. The glance was brief and dismissive and communicated a lot. Harry followed the glance. Then he looked back at Draco with an expression of mild curiosity and complete pleasantness. Ron's a friend, he said, so I'm going to have to skip the guidance, but thanks. Draco's hand, still midway through some gesture that was meant to reinforce the offer, stilled. He hadn't expected that. Harry could see him cycling through it, not hostile, not impressed, not intimidated, not particularly interested in being categorized. The puzzle of it was visible on his face. The Weasleys, Draco said, and the name carried something he'd clearly been taught to load into it. Are good people, Harry said simply. From what I can tell, I'll see you in there. He stepped away to stand with Ron, who'd heard all of it and was looking at Harry with an expression halfway between gratitude and disbelief. You didn't have to, Ron started. I know. He's Malfoy. His family is, I don't care about his family, I care about him, and he seems like someone who's been told too many things about himself. Harry glanced back at Draco, who had regrouped and was speaking to two very large boys who stood slightly behind him the way furniture stands behind someone who is used to furniture. People like that sometimes figure it out. He might be interesting. Ron stared at him. You're a bit strange, Harry. You have no idea, Harry said cheerfully. The Great Hall was the single most spectacular room Harry had ever been in, which was saying something, since Harry had once accidentally flown into a thunderstorm at 60 miles an hour and thought that was the most spectacular thing he'd experienced. The ceiling was the sky. Not a painting of the sky, the actual sky, or something indistinguishable from it, cloud-draped and deep and scattered with stars even though it was barely evening. 4 long tables stretched the length of the hall, packed with students in black robes with different colored ties, and at the far end the staff sat at a table on a raised dais, and the whole thing was lit by thousands of floating candles that made everything amber and warm and ancient. Harry took it in from the doorway. He felt the magic of the ceiling like pressure against his eyes. Then everyone noticed him. It didn't happen all at once. It moved through the hall like a wave through still water, a ripple starting somewhere near the front and spreading outward, heads turning, conversations stopping, and then a rising murmur that wasn't quite silence and wasn't quite noise, but was the specific sound of 1,000 people recalibrating reality. Because word had gotten out somehow, the way word always does in contained communities, some older student must have seen him on the platform, or Hagrid had said something, or the name on the register had been seen by someone. And so as Harry walked with the other first years toward the stool at the front, the name moved through the hall ahead of him like water finding its level. Potter. Harry Potter, he's alive. He's actually here. Harry walked through it without breaking stride. He didn't duck his head or look at the floor or hunch his shoulders against the attention the way people did when they wanted to disappear. He looked around the great hall with open interest, because it was magnificent and deserved to be looked at. And when he caught the eye of a red-haired girl at the Gryffindor table who had tears running down her face, probably the Weasley sister Ron had mentioned, the only girl, he gave her a small nod, and she made a sound that was mostly swallowed by her hand. Professor McGonagall placed a 4-legged stool in front of the hall and set a battered, ancient hat on top of it. Harry had been told about the sorting hat. He'd read about it. What he hadn't anticipated was when the hat's brim stretched open and it began to sing. It was a remarkable performance for an inanimate object. The hall laughed and applauded at the end, and Harry clapped along because it had genuinely been good. The list of names began. Harry watched each student go up, sit down, wait the variable seconds that apparently indicated the difficulty of the decision, and then be sent to one table or another with the hat's announcement booming through the hall. Hermione Granger went up and came back a Gryffindor in about 15 seconds, sitting down to enthusiastic applause with the expression of someone whose preferred outcome has been achieved by her own intellectual merit. Neville Longbottom took longer, nearly a minute, and seemed surprised to be sent to Gryffindor, sitting down with the cautious relief of someone who'd been expecting the other shoe to drop. Potter, Harry. The hall went so quiet you could hear the candles burning. Harry walked up, sat on the stool, and the hat descended over his eyes. For a moment there was nothing, then something that wasn't a voice but felt like one spoke inside his head. Oh, it said. And then after a pause, oh my, Harry waited. I haven't had anything quite like you in a very long time, the hat said. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever had anything quite like you. Do you mind if I go ahead, Harry thought. The hat went through him, not intrusively, more like someone leafing through a well-organized book, familiar with the shape of libraries but surprised by this particular collection. Harry felt it move across his memories. The North Field in November with the stars coming down, Jonathan's hand on his shoulder, Martha's voice, the back 40 at dusk, the pie on the kitchen table, the tornado he'd outrun for fun at age 8. You grew up loved, the hat said, and it sounded slightly surprised, which Harry found interesting, that a hat which had sorted 11-year-olds for 1,000 years could still be surprised by being loved. I did, that's rarer than you'd think. A pause, you have great courage, Gryffindor would welcome you, and great intelligence, Ravenclaw would sharpen you well, and a ruthless efficiency of thought that Slytherin would find appealing. Another pause, but you're not ruthless, are you? You're just capable. There's a difference, Harry agreed. There is. The ruthless use power for themselves, the capable use it for others. The hat seemed to settle, your parents were Gryffindors. But I don't think you're here because of your parents. Number, why are you here? Harry thought about it honestly. Because I wanted to understand where I came from, and because there are people here who need the things I can do. And if no one needed you, I'd still be here. I'd just find something to figure out. The hat made a sound that might have been a laugh. Do you know, in 1,000 years of sorting, I have never had a student who made me feel genuinely uncertain. Uncertain is interesting. A long pause. You do well anywhere, but I think Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. The other tables applauded, even Harry noticed, most of Slytherin, though that might have been reflexive and they'd sort it out later. He handed the hat back to Professor McGonagall, who was maintaining her composure admirably, and went to sit with Hermione and Neville and the red-haired girl who'd been crying, who turned out to be Ginny Weasley, and who told him she was very glad he wasn't dead, which he told her was an extremely relatable sentiment. Ron Weasley was sorted into Gryffindor 2 names later, dropping into the seat next to Harry with the particular satisfaction of someone who has ended up exactly where they needed to be. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy watched Harry Kent sit at the Gryffindor table and laughed with his dinner companions. But his eyes stayed on Harry for a second too long and his jaw was working slightly, which is what happens when a mind is chewing on something it doesn't want to admit is interesting. Harry noticed, filed it away, ate his dinner. The food was, well, it appeared out of nowhere on golden platters, which Harry thought was possibly the best single application of magic he'd yet encountered. He ate with the healthy appetite of someone whose enhanced physiology required significant caloric input, which meant he ate a lot, which meant Ron looked at him with genuine respect. Blimey, Ron said, where does it all go? Complicated metabolism, Harry said, reaching for more roast beef. Hermione, who was eating sensibly and reading the back of a chocolate frog card at the same time, said without looking up, you know Dumbledore is on this card. He's considered the greatest wizard of the age. She flipped it over. He enjoys 10-pin bowling, apparently. Harry looked up at the staff table. Dumbledore sat at the center, very tall, very old, with a beard that qualified as its own geographical feature and half-moon spectacles perched on a nose that had clearly been broken and healed multiple times. He had the quality of someone who was always only partly in the present moment, as if he kept the rest of himself somewhere else for important work. He was also watching Harry. Not obviously, he was watching the entire room, which headmasters apparently had to do, but Harry could tell. He had, after all, ears that could pick up heartbeats. And Dumbledore's heart rate did a specific thing when his eyes moved to Harry's end of the table that was different from what it did when he looked at anyone else. Not alarm, something more like assessment. And something underneath the assessment that might have been relief or guilt or both. Harry looked directly at the headmaster. Dumbledore met his gaze, held it for one moment and gave a small nod, not of recognition exactly, but of acknowledgement. I see you. Harry nodded back, I see you too. Then Dumbledore looked at something else and Harry went back to the roast beef and filed Albus Dumbledore away in the part of his mind labeled complicated, revisit later. He became aware of the defense against the dark arts professor somewhere between the main course and dessert. Professor Quirrell, who wore a purple turban, and a manner Harry would have described to someone who asked, as very carefully assembled. He was talking to Professor Snape on his left with the bright, slightly too much enthusiasm of someone who has prepared their conversation topics in advance and was delivering them on schedule. Snape wasn't listening. Snape was doing the same thing Dumbledore was doing, watching Harry, but with a completely different energy. Where Dumbledore's attention felt calculating and somewhat compassionate, Snape's was sharp and cold and private, and when Harry met his gaze, Snape looked away first but not quickly, which told Harry that the look away was a choice rather than a reflex. Quirrell, on the other hand, didn't look at Harry at all, which was strange. Everyone else in the hall had looked at Harry at least twice. Not looking, in a room where everyone was looking, was its own kind of statement. Harry ate his treacle tart and thought about this. Gryffindor Tower was up a spiral staircase behind a portrait of a large woman in a pink dress who was apparently the fat lady and who guarded the common room with great seriousness. The password, Caput Draconis, was given by Percy Weasley, who had materialized to escort the first years up, and had introduced himself as prefect approximately 4 times in the first 10 minutes. The common room was red and gold and warm, with fat armchairs and a fire that clearly burned without consuming in bookshelves, and the comfortable, worn look of a room where generations of people had been stressed and joyful and exhausted and young. Harry stood in the middle of it and thought, yeah, this works. He had a dormitory with Ron, Neville, and two other boys, Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan, who were already arguing about whether magic or technology was more impressive. Harry had opinions about this that he kept to himself. The beds had curtains and were very large and very comfortable. He lay in the dark listening to Ron snore within 4 minutes of lights out, which he found immediately endearing, and stared at the ceiling and went through the day like reviewing film footage. Hermione, brilliant, thorough, lonely in the specific way of people who have always been the smartest person in the room and aren't sure what to do when they aren't. Worth knowing well. Ron, honest and funny and underselling himself in every direction. First real wizard friend. Good. Neville, terrified and brave in the specific combination that made people do remarkable things. Watch for him. Draco, complicated. Not evil or not yet, probably not ever if his circumstances changed. But built wrong by people who should have built him better. Dumbledore, aware that Harry was alive before tonight, old enough and careful enough to have reasons for everything. Quirrell, something off, not sure what yet. Snape, the specific look he'd given Harry wasn't recognition from a file or a reputation, it was something personal, find out what. And underneath all of that, the thing he came back to last, the way the castle had felt when he'd stepped inside. The way its magic had pressed against his own, not fighting, not submitting, but communicating, the way two radio signals overlap and make something new. Like the castle knew him, or knew what he was, or had been waiting in the patient way of very old things for this particular combination to show up. Harry rolled over and faced the window where the Scottish sky was going dark purple around the edges of the mountains. He thought about his parents in the moving photograph. He thought, I'm here, I'll figure it out. He slept well and without dreams, which was its own kind of statement. He was first up in the morning, he always was. He went down to the common room and wrote a letter to Martha and Jonathan, arrived fine. Castle is extraordinary, made friends, will explain the owl system later. Please send more pie, and then sat by the window watching the grounds lighten with dawn. The grounds at dawn were something else. The lake was still and enormous and dark, with something large moving just beneath its surface. The forbidden forest at the edge of the grounds was exactly as ominous as advertised. The Quidditch pitch was visible beyond the forest's edge, and even empty it had the quality of a stage, a place built for spectacle. Harry was studying the angle of the towers when he noticed the figure on the grounds. Professor Quirrell was walking the perimeter of the castle's east wall. Not strolling, moving with the specific directional intent of someone following a route they'd established in advance. He was examining the stonework. Not obviously, not in a way that would read as strange from a distance. But Harry had vision that could resolve facial expressions from 200 meters, and Quirrell was examining the stonework very specifically, at intervals, in a pattern. Harry watched him for a few minutes without moving. Then Quirrell stopped and put his hand flat against a particular section of wall, and Harry watched the professor's face shift, just for a moment, just a flicker, from the bumbling, enthusiastic expression he'd worn at dinner to something older and much colder and fully focused. Then the flicker passed. Quirrell moved on. Harry sat back. He thought about the third-floor corridor that McGonagall had mentioned was forbidden. He thought about Quirrell's turban and the precise absence of any glance in Harry's direction during a dinner where everyone glanced at Harry. He thought about the section of wall Quirrell had just touched, which was directly below and east of the third-floor corridor. He thought, something is happening in this castle, and it started before I arrived. Ron clattered down the stairs behind him and said breakfast. And Harry said absolutely, and they went down to the Great Hall, and Harry had a very large and completely normal breakfast, and talked to Ron about Quidditch with genuine enthusiasm, while the part of his mind that handled the other kind of work ran quietly in the background like a program nobody else could see. The thing about growing up in Kansas, about running around tornadoes and moving trucks and hearing things 3 miles away, was that you learned to do two things at once. You learned to be present and pleasant and engaged with the people you loved, while the part of you that was something extraordinary stayed alert just underneath, watching, cataloging, making its careful notes. Harry Kent had been doing it his whole life. He was very good at it. And the note he made about Quirrell as he laughed at something Ron said about the keeper for the Chudley Cannons was underlined. Classes started Thursday. Charms was taught by Professor Flitwick, who stood on a stack of books to see over his desk and had an enthusiasm for his subject that was genuinely infectious. He called the register and fell off his books when he reached Harry's name, which Harry felt mildly responsible for. Transfiguration was McGonagall, who turned her desk into a pig and back before they'd sat down, which established the stakes clearly and efficiently. She had the teaching style of someone who finds incompetence baffling but not unforgivable, and Harry found her clarifying in the same way a cold morning was clarifying, bracing, functional, better than the alternative. Astronomy was at midnight on the tower roof, which Harry loved immediately and completely. History of magic was Professor Binns, a ghost, who spoke in a voice calibrated exactly to produce unconsciousness in anyone not actively resisting it. Harry stayed awake out of courtesy and spent the time trying to read the text on the board from his angle, and then switching to listening at a frequency most people couldn't access, which at least gave him more interesting information than the main lecture. He was looking forward to potions. Ron looked at him when he said this the night before with an expression of pure bafflement. "Snape terrorizes people," Ron said. Bill said, Charlie said, yeah, Harry said. "I want to see how he does it." Potions class was held in a dungeon that smelled of something between a very good stew and a very bad decision. Snape entered without preamble and stood at the front of the room and looked at them all with the expression of someone arriving to inspect a situation they expected to be disappointing. And then his eyes found Harry. And Harry saw it again, that flash of something private and specific, before Snape's face closed back to neutral and he began to speak. His voice was low and precisely controlled. The kind of voice that made you work to hear it so that you were already leaning in before you realized he had the room. "There will be no foolish wand-waving or silly incantations in this class," Snape said. "As such, I don't expect many of you to appreciate the subtle science and exact art that is potion-making." He moved through the introductory remarks the way water moves through a fixed channel, efficient, cold, with pressure behind it. Then he stopped in front of Harry. "Potter," he said. "Kent," Harry said pleasantly, a beat. "Kent." The word carried a full paragraph of subtext. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Most of the class looked at their desks. Harry had read the textbook twice and also 3 supplementary volumes. "Draft of Living Death," he said. "It's one of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The combination works because asphodel is a member of the lily family and has particular synergy with..." "Simply the name was sufficient," Snape said. "You asked what you'd get, I'm telling you what you'd get." Something moved in Snape's eyes that might in different lighting have been called respect. He moved on. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat." "It's a stone that acts as an antidote to most poisons. If I didn't have access to a goat's stomach, I'd check the potions supply cabinet. They're usually stocked for emergency use." Snape looked at him. "And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "No difference. They're the same plant, also called aconite. Highly toxic in most forms, useful in restricted potions, and the name wolfsbane is mostly colloquial. The technical name varies by regional tradition." Harry paused. "The interesting thing about aconite is that the dosage threshold between medicinal and lethal is extremely narrow, which is what makes it useful if you need to create a potion that disables without being obvious about." "Thank you," Snape said, and something in the way he said it was tight at the edges. He moved away. Hermione, sitting next to Harry, leaned over and whispered, "Where did you learn all that?" "I read a lot," Harry said. "I read everything assigned and you just went further than I did, and I find that very motivating and slightly annoying," she whispered back. "Good," Harry said. Snape's teaching turned out to be genuinely excellent once you got past the difficulty of it, which Harry suspected was the point. If you couldn't handle Snape being cold and exacting, you probably couldn't handle potions being cold and exacting. And potions required precision the way surgery required precision. Harry found the class interesting in the same way he found the controls of a complicated piece of machinery interesting. A lot of variables with clear relationships, requiring attention and patience. He also spent the class watching Snape in the way he'd spent breakfast watching Quirrell on the grounds. There was something in how Snape looked at him, specifically at the question of who Harry's parents were, what that meant, what Snape's history with it was, that Harry kept turning over. Not a threat. Not dislike exactly, something more tangled than that, something that had a history he didn't have access to yet. He'd get access eventually. He was patient. He left the dungeon behind Ron and Hermione and Neville, all of them comparing notes and running through the afternoon's homework, and past Draco Malfoy on the stairs going up. Draco looked at him and opened his mouth. Harry said pleasantly before Draco could speak, "You're going to say something about my performance in potions, and I'd honestly rather hear something interesting. What's the thing you're actually thinking?" Draco closed his mouth. He stared at Harry. His jaw did the thing where it was chewing on something. Then, and Harry got the sense this was rare, perhaps unprecedented, Draco Malfoy said something honest. "I don't know what to do with you." "Nobody does," Harry said. "Give it time." He kept walking and Ron caught up and said, "What was that about?" and Harry said, Draco's interesting, and Ron said, you're mental, and Harry said, probably, and they went to Charms and the day went on in the good, busy, alive way of days that are full of things worth paying attention to. That night, Harry wrote his second letter to the Kents. He told them about the classes and the castle and the ceiling of the Great Hall. He told them about Ron and Hermione. He told them about the Sorting Hats conversation, which he hadn't told anyone else, and which he thought his parents would find interesting. He told them about Dumbledore's measuring look and Quirrell's hand against the wall and Snape's private history that sat behind his eyes like something locked. He told them, I think something is happening here that I'm going to need to figure out. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm paying attention. He thought before he sealed the letter, Dad would say that paying attention is the most important thing. Mum would say to eat something. Both of them would be right. He sent Archimedes off into the Scottish night and watched the owl become a small shape against the stars and felt, for just a moment, the specific ache of distance, not regret, not homesickness, but the honest acknowledgement that the people you love most exist at the other end of some number of miles, and the miles are real even when the love makes them manageable. Then the ache passed and he went to bed. Chapter 3. The weight of what you can do. The first time Harry flew a broomstick, he laughed so hard he nearly fell off. Not because it was difficult, it wasn't, not even slightly. He'd been airborne under his own power since he was 8 years old, and this was, objectively, slower. But because of the look on Madame Hooch's face when she told them all to kick off in half, the class wobbled violently 6 feet off the ground, and Harry just went smooth and immediate and straight up, and Madame Hooch's whistle ended up in her mouth without her quite remembering putting it there. It was mid-September. The air had turned that particular Scottish cold that came off the mountains with intent. The whole first-year class was standing in the courtyard with their broomsticks, a collection of aging school brooms that were long past their best, most of them vibrating with suppressed mechanical resentment, and Madame Hooch had just finished her introductory lecture on grip and posture and the physics of braking. Mount your brooms, she said. When I blow my whistle, kick off gently. Harry was already 20 feet up by the time the whistle blew. He hadn't meant to show off. He'd just forgotten to be gentle about it, the way you forget to slow down when you've been running fast your whole life. He caught himself, looked down at the class below him and found 11 first-years and 1 flying instructor, all with their faces upturned like sunflowers. Mr. Kent, Madame Hooch said in a voice she was working to keep level. Sorry, Harry said, too fast. Can you come down, please? He came down, not quickly, there was no reason to be quick, settling back to ground level with the casual ease of someone stepping off a curb. He was aware of Ron watching him with wide eyes and Hermione watching him with narrowed ones, the difference being that Ron was thinking how and Hermione was thinking why. Madame Hooch looked at him for a long moment. She was a compact woman with yellow hawk-like eyes that missed very little, and what they were doing right now was a full assessment that had nothing to do with broom technique. Have you flown before? She asked. Not on a broom, Harry said. Another pause. Not on a broom, she repeated. No, ma'am. She looked at him. She looked at the sky. She looked back at him. Well, she said, with the pragmatism of a woman who has taught flying for 30 years and has stopped being surprised by exceptional cases, your posture is excellent. Practice controlled descent. She turned back to the rest of the class, and Harry did controlled descent drills while everyone else worked on controlled ascent, which meant he was going the wrong direction from everyone else and had a great deal of sky to himself, and found this arrangement completely satisfactory. It was during the third descent drill that Neville went wrong. Harry saw it before Madame Hooch did. Neville's grip had been uncertain all morning, his knuckles white and his body angled slightly wrong. And when his broom lurched, it did so without warning, and Neville's hands came off the handle entirely and he went up instead of staying still, straight up, fast, 20 feet and rising, and his face was the specific face of someone who has known all along something would go wrong, and here it was. Harry was moving before Neville reached 30 feet. Not on the broom, he left the broom hovering and went up himself, which was significantly faster, and caught Neville by the back of his robes at 40 feet with one hand while Neville's broom continued enthusiastically skyward. He brought them both down at a pace that he calculated wouldn't panic Neville worse than he already was, which meant slow and steady and level like a lift. Got you, Harry said. Neville's eyes were squeezed shut. Am I dead? Number, are you sure? Pretty sure. Harry set him down on the grass and let go. Neville opened his eyes, looked at the ground under his feet, and let out a breath that seemed to involve most of his internal organs. Madame Hooch had her wand out. The class was completely silent. Draco Malfoy, Harry noticed, had started to say something at the moment Neville went up, the beginning of some comment that had stalled and not restarted. That was, Madame Hooch stopped. Is Neville okay? Harry asked. I'm okay, Neville said, still looking at the ground. Thank you quite a lot. You didn't use your broom, Seamus Finnegan said from the cluster of first years with the expression of someone who has seen something that requires reclassification. No, Harry agreed. You just flew without the broom. Yeah, how? Harry looked at the class. He looked at their faces, curious, startled, some of them still calibrating, and he made a decision, which was the same decision he always made and had never second-guessed. Be honest, be straightforward, don't apologize for what you are. I'm not entirely a regular wizard, he said. I can fly, I'm fast, I'm fairly strong, I've always been that way, he shrugged. It's useful sometimes. The class processed this. Ron, to his credit, looked delighted rather than unsettled. Hermione was already formulating questions. Harry could see them stacking up behind her eyes. Neville looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone who has just been saved and is revising their understanding of the world around them. Draco Malfoy was very still. Madame Hooch recovered herself. Right, she said briskly. Back to the drill. Mr. Kent, fetch Longbottom's broom, please. Harry went and got the broom, which had lodged itself in a weather vane near the top of the astronomy tower. He was back in 45 seconds, which he thought was pretty good considering the weather vane was 70 feet up and had a complicated relationship with the wind. He handed Neville the broom and Neville held it at arm's length for the rest of the lesson as though it had personally offended him. After class, walking back across the grounds, Draco appeared at Harry's left again. You can actually fly, Draco said, not with contempt this time, with something that was reluctantly closer to honest interest. Apparently, without a broom. Yeah, a pause. Draco was quiet for a few steps. How fast? Harry considered. Fast enough. Draco's mouth did something complicated. The Quidditch trials are in 2 weeks. I know. You could. I know, Harry said again and glanced at Draco sideways. You're going to try out too? Obviously. Good, Harry said. I prefer competition. He meant it completely, and something about the completeness of it seemed to land differently than Draco expected, because he was quiet for the rest of the walk back, and for once the quiet didn't feel hostile. Hermione cornered him in the library that evening. She had 3 books and a scroll and the expression of someone who has spent the day constructing an argument and is now ready to deploy it. She sat across from him, arranged the books in a way that communicated she had a system, and said, I've been thinking about what you said at flying lessons. Which part? The part where you said you weren't entirely a regular wizard. She opened the top book. I've been going back through everything I know about magical theory, and there's almost nothing that accounts for what you can do. The flying, the strength, wizards aren't typically physically exceptional. Magic operates around the body, not through it, except in certain recorded cases. She looked up. I found 3 references, 2 are mythological. One is from a text called Magical Beings of Unknown Classification, which is extremely obscure, and which Madame Pince had to retrieve from the restricted section annex. Harry looked at her. You got something out of the restricted section annex on our 3rd week. I asked nicely and cited specific academic need. She said this with complete seriousness. The reference is vague, but it mentions individuals where an external enhancement of solar or stellar origin has fused with native magical ability, producing anomalous results in strength, speed, and sensory perception. Harry was quiet. Solar or stellar origin, he said. Yes. She watched him carefully. Does that mean something to you? Harry leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the library, vaulted stone, very old, with the smell of ancient paper and ink and time layered into it. When I was little, he said, I asked my mum what the sun was made of. She said mostly hydrogen and helium burning at about 5,000 degrees Celsius on the surface. She's very precise. A pause. Then I asked why I could run so fast, and she said, I think you're absorbing it. I think the sunlight is going somewhere useful inside you. Hermione stared at him. That's extraordinary. She takes it pretty well. I mean, the physics of it is extraordinary. If you're somehow converting solar radiation into kinetic potential, she stopped herself. Can I ask about your parents, your biological parents? James and Lily Potter, Harry said. Hermione's hands went still on the book. Oh, she said softly. Yeah, she was quiet for a moment, not a calculating quiet, a human one. I'm sorry, she said. I read about them. They sounded like good people, Harry said. From what I can tell, I didn't know them. He said it without the weight of tragedy, just as fact, because the Kents had made sure the not knowing didn't hollow him out. My mum, Martha, thinks that whatever Lily did that night, the protection she put on me, it might have amplified what was already there. Like it opened something up. He paused. There's a theory that the magical core can interact with external energy sources if the circumstances are extreme enough. That's not a theory I've read. I'm working on it, Harry said. It might just be mine. Hermione looked at him across the table. There was something shifting in her expression, the reorganization of a worldview in real time. Harry watched it happen with the respectful interest of someone who appreciated good thinking being done at speed. You're not scared of it, she said. Any of it. Should I be? She thought about it genuinely. Most people would be. Most people didn't have my dad taking them out to the back 40 and saying, show me everything. Harry smiled. It's hard to be afraid of something someone you love has called a gift. Hermione looked at her books. She looked at Harry. She said very quietly, "My parents are dentists. They're very kind and very confused by all of this. They're glad I'm happy here." She paused. They love me but they can't always follow me, you know?" Harry did know, not from his own experience. His parents had always followed him, but he recognized the shape of the loneliness. "Hermione," he said, "for what it's worth I can follow you." She looked up sharply. "I mean that," he said. "Whatever you're working on, whatever theory you've got, I'm interested. Genuinely." She sat with this for a moment. Then she straightened her books and said, "Right then, tell me about the solar theory, all of it. I want to know how it works." They stayed in the library until Madame Pince turned the lights off. The thing about Hogwarts was that it was never the same day twice. Harry moved through October with his eyes wide open, and October repaid the attention. He mastered the Wingardium Leviosa charm in the first class and spent the next 3 sessions working on precision rather than power, which Flitwick found delightful. He discovered in Transfiguration that he could hold the image of the target object in his mind with total clarity. Something about the enhanced visual processing made mental images extremely stable. And his Matches to Needles transformation was done perfectly the first time, and he spent the rest of the lesson helping Neville, who was finding the image-holding aspect deeply challenging and responded better to patient repetition than to public performance. Neville, Harry was learning, was the most interesting ongoing project in Gryffindor Tower. Not because Neville was failing, he was struggling, which was different. He had the magical ability. Harry could see it the same way he could feel the castle's magic, like a heat shimmer just beneath Neville's surface. But it was blocked by something he'd been told about himself, some story about inadequacy that had been told so many times it had the weight of fact. Harry kept working at it, not loudly, not with the dramatic intervention of someone proving a point, just quietly, consistently asking Neville's opinion on things, listening when Neville was right, which was more often than Neville expected. Ron watched this with the slightly baffled expression of someone who knows they're seeing something good happen, but can't quite decode the mechanism. "You're doing something," Ron said one evening when Neville had just explained a piece of magical theory to Hermione with the surprised confidence of someone discovering they know more than they thought. "Just talking to him," Harry said. "It's not just talking," Harry shrugged. "He knows things, he just doesn't know he knows them." Ron was quiet for a moment. "My mum does that," he said. "The not letting people feel small, she does it to all of us." "Sounds like a good mum." "She's brilliant," Ron said simply, with the total conviction of someone who means it entirely and doesn't need to defend it. Harry smiled. "Same." The letter from Jonathan arrived in the second week of October with 3 pieces of pie, inexplicably sealed into a charmed container that Hermione identified as using a preservation charm of slightly above standard sophistication, which meant Martha had done research, which Harry found deeply endearing. "Harry, your mum has been reading every book about magical theory she can find, which means there are 12 books on the kitchen table and the actual kitchen is being accessed through a narrow corridor between them. She says to tell you the preservation charm was not as hard as it looks once you understand the principle. I've been reading too. Not the theory, the history. There's more of it than I expected, and more of it concerns you than I'm comfortable with, which is probably the point. Here's what I know about prophecies, Harry. People have been told their futures for a long time, and the ones who live well are the ones who treat the telling as information, not instruction. You understand the difference. We raised you to understand the difference. Eat the pie, it's apple." Love, Dad. Harry ate the pie in the dormitory with Ron, who declared it the best thing he'd ever put in his mouth, and asked if Harry's parents accepted regular correspondence from appreciative strangers. "P.S. Your mother wants me to ask if you've made friends. I've told her about Ron and Hermione from your last letter. She says Ron sounds wonderful and Hermione sounds like someone she'd like to have a conversation with for approximately 6 hours. She also says to tell you she's proud of you. I'm saying the same thing, but I'm putting it in the postscript so I don't sound like I'm competing with her for the better line." Harry read the postscript twice and then folded the letter into his jacket pocket with the photograph. Potions in the 3rd week of October was, for the first time, not about Snape. Or rather, it was about Snape, but what Snape did was interesting rather than simply exacting. They were brewing a simple boil cure potion. Harry had read the instructions twice and prepared his station with the methodical thoroughness that was becoming a minor point of contention between him and Draco Malfoy, who had the next bench, and had apparently decided that one-upping Harry at potions was a project worth investing in. Harry found this motivating rather than annoying. What happened was this: Snape was moving through the room in his usual way, slow and deliberate, the way a chess player moves through a game, examining every board, and he stopped behind Harry's station. Harry was dicing the nettles with a precision that was frankly surgical. Snape watched for a moment. "You're cutting with the grain," Snape said. "I know," Harry said. "The instructions say to dice, but cutting with the grain on nettles keeps the cellular structure intact longer, which means more consistent potency release during the simmering phase." Silence. Harry kept cutting. "Where did you read that?" Snape asked, and his voice had lost the cold edge it usually carried in the direction of Harry's bench. Not warm, it would never be warm, that wasn't the architecture of the man, but genuinely curious. "I didn't," Harry said. "I worked it out from the properties of the plant." He glanced up. "The textbook explains what to do, it doesn't always explain why. The why is usually more useful." Snape looked at him. The private thing behind his eyes did its complicated thing again. "Your mother," Snape said carefully, precisely, "had a gift for understanding the underlying logic of ingredients. She rarely followed instructions without understanding the reason behind them." Harry set down the knife. He turned to look at Snape directly. "You knew her. We were in the same year." Snape held the eye contact for exactly as long as he had the previous times, not breaking away but not extending it either. "She was the most talented potions student I have encountered in 30 years of teaching." "Before or after 30 years?" Harry asked. The corner of Snape's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the ghost of one observed from a significant distance. "Before and after," he said. He moved away. Harry stood at his bench for a second, then went back to the nettles. Hermione from 2 benches over mouthed, "That just happened." Harry nodded. He filed it away in the place he was building, the architecture of Snape's complicated history, and found it made the picture both clearer and more interesting. Not a man who hated Harry. A man who had loved someone Harry had never known and didn't know what to do with the evidence of her. He'd figure out what to do with that. In time. His Boil Cure potion was the only one in the class to turn the precise shade of pink indicated in the textbook. Draco's was one shade off. Draco looked at Harry's cauldron and looked at his own cauldron and said nothing, which Harry recognized as a form of honesty. The argument happened on a Wednesday. It had been building for a while, the specific kind of build that happens when someone is used to being the best at something and encounters evidence that this may no longer be unconditionally true. Draco had spent October adjusting his understanding of Harry Kent by degrees, each adjustment small enough to be managed, but by the 4th week the accumulated weight of them had produced a pressure that needed somewhere to go. It found it somewhere in the corridor outside the charm's classroom, after Harry had performed a hover charm that made Professor Flitwick make a noise usually associated with extremely good news. "You're showing off," Draco said, appearing beside him in the corridor. Harry kept walking. "I'm answering the question I was asked." "You don't have to make it look like that." "Like what?" "Like it's effortless, like all the rest of us are." He stopped himself. Harry stopped walking. He turned to look at Draco, who was, and this was interesting, angry in a way that didn't have contempt underneath it. It was a cleaner anger than that, more personal. "Behind," Harry supplied. Draco's jaw tightened. "That's not what I said, but it's what you meant." Harry looked at him, not unkindly. "Draco, you're good at charms. You're actually quite good. Your wrist movement is better than most people in the class. But you spend half the lesson watching me instead of the charm, which means you're competing with a person instead of practicing a skill, and those are 2 very different exercises." Draco stared at him. "I'm not competing with you," Harry said. "I don't have a reason to. I find it interesting that you think I am." "Everyone competes with you," Draco said, and for once it sounded like information rather than an accusation. "Whether they mean to or not, you walk into a room and the room reorganizes itself. You can't." He stopped again, started differently. "My father says that power is inherited. It flows through bloodlines. That's what makes certain families significant." His voice was still controlled, still structured, but underneath there was a crack in it, not weakness, something more like the sound of a belief meeting resistance for the first time. "And then I show up from Kansas," Harry said. "Yes. With no pure bloodline, no family history in the wizarding world, raised by muggles." Harry said it flatly. "And I can do things you can't, not because I'm better than you, because I'm different from you." He looked at Draco. "Your father's theory might be wrong, Draco, that's frightening, but wrong theories don't stop being wrong just because they're frightening." Draco looked at him for a long time. Around them the corridor filled and emptied with students passing between classes, and neither of them moved, and the air between them was the air of a conversation that had reached somewhere neither of them had entirely planned for. "I don't know what to do with you," Draco said again. "You said that before. It keeps being true." Harry considered him. "Stop trying to place me in a category you already have. I don't fit any of them, neither do you probably if you'd let yourself find out." He paused. "Come to the Quidditch trials tomorrow. Fly well, that's the only competition I'm interested in." He walked away. Draco didn't call after him. But Harry heard his footsteps a minute later going the same direction and found this sufficiently satisfactory. The Quidditch trials were held on a gray Saturday with a wind that had come off the mountains with the specific intention of making everything harder. Harry had considered the night before whether to try out. Not whether he'd make the team, that wasn't the consideration, but whether it was fair. He was categorically faster than any broom, could see the snitch at distances that made the visual advantage nearly absolute, had reflexes that would embarrass the laws of physics. He decided to try out on one condition: he wouldn't fly under his own power. He'd use the broom, fly by broom physics, and see how the balance felt. If he made the team that way, it was honest. Oliver Wood ran the trials with the intensity of a military general who has somehow found himself responsible for a sporting event and intends to treat it as equivalent. He was 5 years older than Harry and had the look of someone for whom Quidditch was not a game but a calling. Harry borrowed a nimbus from the equipment shed. He didn't have his own yet and went up. The broom was objectively fast. He respected it. He stayed within its limits, let it do what it was made for, and moved the way you move when you've learned to trust a tool, clean and efficient and without waste. The snitch was released for the Seeker trials. It disappeared in approximately a quarter of a second. Harry tracked it by sound and peripheral motion. The wing flicker sound was distinctive at his frequency of hearing and went after it, not at his own speed. At the broom's speed, which was considerable and which he pushed to its limit without exceeding it, and which meant he was moving faster than anyone watching had seen a first-year move on a school broom. He caught the snitch in 53 seconds. Wood stared at him from across the pitch. Harry held up the snitch. It struggled briefly and then seemed to accept the situation. "Can you do that again?" Wood said. "Do you want to release another one and find out?" They released 2 more. Harry caught both. The third one he almost let get away deliberately to see how the edge of his honest broom speed felt, and caught it at the absolute limit with one hand extended and his body at a 45-degree angle to the broom, and the stands, if they'd been populated, would have lost their minds. "You're the Seeker," Wood said with the reverence of someone who has found their missing piece. "You're the youngest Seeker in a century." "Who was the last youngest?" Harry asked. "Charlie Weasley." Harry looked at Ron, who was standing at the edge of the pitch with his hands in his pockets and an expression of pure chaotic delight. "Does Charlie know you've given his record away?" Harry called. "He'll be fine," Ron said. "He's got dragons now anyway." The broom arrived the next morning. It came at breakfast, carried by 6 school owls working in coordination, which told Harry even before he opened the long parcel that it was something unusual. The rest of the Great Hall went quiet in the specific way of people watching something ceremonial, which Harry found unnecessarily theatrical, but he opened the package neatly because Martha had opinions about tearing wrapping. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was a Nimbus 2000, the same model that had been in the window in Diagon Alley. "From McGonagall," Ron breathed. "She never does that. She doesn't bend rules for anyone." Harry held the broom and felt its quality, the grain of the ash wood, the even binding of the twigs, the perfect aerodynamic balance of the whole thing. He ran his hand along the handle. It was genuinely the nicest tool he'd ever held. He thought about what Jonathan had said about trucks. You could just fly without one, but using the tool well within the limits of the tool, that's a different skill. Both are worth having. He was going to enjoy this. "Nice," he said. Ron made a noise of strangled agreement. "Can I hold it?" Seamus asked. No, Harry and Ron said simultaneously. He had been at Hogwarts for 7 weeks when he found the thing on the 3rd floor. He hadn't gone looking for it. He'd been up past curfew, not carelessly. He had a reason. He'd heard something while lying in bed that shouldn't have been where he heard it. A sound from 3 floors down that resolved into the very specific sound of something large and alive moving through corridors it didn't quite fit. And he'd followed the sound to figure out what it was. What it was, it turned out, was a dog. Specifically a dog with 3 heads, occupying the entirety of the 3rd floor corridor behind a locked door that Harry had opened with a touch, because the lock was a standard Muggle deadbolt and deadbolts were not an obstacle to someone who had once accidentally bent a fire hydrant by looking at it wrong. The 3-headed dog was enormous and smelled like old meat and had 3 sets of very large teeth, all of which were briefly aimed at Harry when he pushed the door open. Harry looked at it. It growled, a sound like distant thunder, 3 separate resonances slightly out of phase with each other. Harry looked at the 3 heads individually. The leftmost seemed to be the one in charge. He met its eyes. "I'm not here to cause problems," he said. "I heard you and I wanted to check you were all right." The growling dropped a register, not silent but down. The right head tilted. Animals generally liked Harry. He didn't fully understand why and had stopped questioning it around age 7 when he'd found that coyotes didn't bother sheep on their farm as long as Harry was around. He'd always assumed it was something about the frequency he existed at. The middle head was looking at something below the dog's feet. Harry looked down. There was a trapdoor. He stood and looked at it for a long moment. A 3-headed dog guarding a trapdoor on the 3rd floor that Professor McGonagall had explicitly said was forbidden. He catalogued this addition to the file and backed out of the room carefully, keeping his attention on the left head, which maintained its vigil until the door was closed. He walked back upstairs in the dark and went over what he knew. Quirrell examining the east wall, the third-floor corridor, something worth guarding with a three-headed dog. Whatever it was, it mattered enough for Dumbledore to post a specific prohibition on the corridor during the start-of-term feast. He sat in the armchair by the dying fire in the common room and thought it through in the methodical way he'd learned from years of working out complicated things alone on the Kansas plains, where the sky was big and the thinking space was unlimited. Someone had put something under that trapdoor, something important enough to guard spectacularly. And the first question wasn't what, although that was interesting, the first question was why now? Why bring it here? Why this castle? What was in this particular building that made it the safest place for whatever it was? Or who was in this building? Harry sat with that thought. He thought about Dumbledore's measuring look on the first night. The calculation behind the relief. The sense of someone who had organized things toward a particular outcome and was checking whether the pieces were in position. He thought about Quirrell's hand against the wall. He thought about a man who had come back from death as a ghost of himself, who needed a body to return to anything like power, who might, if the legends Harry had now read suggested accurately, require a particular object to complete that return. He thought whatever is under that trapdoor, someone wants it, and the person who wants it is already in this castle. He went to bed, he slept. In the morning he told Hermione. She went very quiet in the way she went quiet when something large and complex had just landed in front of her and she was already building the analysis. "We should tell someone," she said. "Who?" She opened her mouth, closed it, went through the faculty roster in her mind visibly. "Dumbledore knows about the corridor. He set the guard himself," she frowned. "So either he doesn't know there's a threat inside the school, in which case telling him is urgent, or he does know, in which case he's managing it," Harry said. "And we're part of what he's managing." Hermione looked at him. "That's a very specific kind of distrust for someone who's met the man twice." "I don't distrust him," Harry said. "I just don't think Dumbledore does things without a reason. Everything he does is for a reason, including the corridor, including the fact that he put the thing under it after I arrived here." He paused. "I want to know what's there, and I want to know before anything happens to it. And then we deal with it." Hermione considered this. "We," she said, "if you want to be." She looked at her books. She looked at Harry. She seemed to make a calculation about what kind of person she was going to be, and then she seemed to realize she'd made that calculation some time ago. "Obviously," she said, "they told Ron that evening." Ron's response was chronologically, "What then? 3 heads, then I'm in, then a pause, then my mum is going to absolutely kill me if anything happens." "Nothing's going to happen," Harry said. "Says the person who flies without a broom and catches snitches like it's boring," Ron said. "Easy for you." "I'll keep you safe," Harry said, and he meant it in the simple and complete way he meant most things, and Ron heard that in it and nodded and said nothing else, which was a very Ron Weasley way of saying I believe you. Halloween was 2 weeks away. Harry stood on the astronomy tower roof at midnight, his homework done, the cold air coming off the loch below, and looked at the stars. He could see them better than any telescope. The resolution of his vision extended upward as naturally as it extended outward. And the stars above Scotland were extraordinary, cold and clear and ancient in ways that made everything human feel briefly small and briefly beautiful. He thought about Lily Potter standing in a nursery whispering words that weren't quite spells. He thought about what it must have meant to choose that. To put yourself between a child and the end of everything and make the choice so completely that the magic of it lasted 11 years and across an ocean and into the bones of a boy who carried it still. In the scar above his eye and the warmth in his blood and the specific frequency he existed at that made 3-headed dogs lower their growl and ancient castles vibrate like a recognition. He thought, I don't know you, but I know what you did, and I'll be worth it. The stars held their positions with total indifference, which was fine. He wasn't talking to them. He went back inside, 2 weeks until Halloween. Something was building. He could feel it the way he felt weather building, the pressure before rain, the specific quality of air before lightning. Something in the castle was moving toward something, and Harry Kent intended to be the one who decided how it arrived. He was not afraid. He never had been. Chapter 4. Halloween, the morning of October 31st, arrived with the particular energy of a day that already knows what it's going to do. Harry felt it when he woke up. A low vibration in the castle's magic that was different from the daily hum he'd grown used to, slightly off-key in the way a tuned instrument goes when the temperature changes. He lay in bed for a moment and listened to it, the way you listen to a sound you can't quite identify, trying to find where it was coming from and what it meant. He couldn't locate it, which meant it was coming from everywhere. He got up, got dressed, and went to breakfast. The Great Hall had been decorated overnight, thousands of live bats cycling the ceiling in slow loops, hundreds of carved pumpkins floating at head height, each one lit from inside with a different color of magical flame. The food was extraordinary and slightly sinister, which Harry found completely appropriate for the occasion. He ate well and listened to the castle. Ron sat next to him working through a plate of scrambled eggs and reading the Quidditch section of the Daily Prophet simultaneously, a skill that Harry admired on a technical level. It says here, Ron said without looking up, that the Chudley Cannons haven't changed their strategy in 12 years and their management has committed to keeping it that way, which honestly at some point you have to respect the consistency. Even if the strategy doesn't work. Especially then, there's something pure about it. Ron turned a page. Quidditch tonight, Gryffindor versus, well no, first match is next week. I've just been thinking about it since Tuesday. Think about Transfiguration instead, Hermione said across the table without looking up from her book. We have McGonagall's essay on animate to inanimate conversion due tomorrow, and I've seen your draft, and Ron the Hedgehog was supposed to become a pincushion, not the other way around. That's a conceptual misread, Ron said. Both of them have pins, please finish the essay, Hermione said. Harry watched the staff table. Quirrell was there, eating something that looked like porridge, talking to no one. His turban today was a slightly different shade of purple. Harry had noticed he varied them, one each weekday, same rotation, and he was sitting with the posture of someone who is performing normality and has been doing it long enough that the performance had settled into his muscles. But his eyes, when he thought no one was watching, moved to a fixed point in the middle distance, not at anyone, not at anything specific, just ahead and slightly upward, toward the third floor. Harry ate his toast and noted the direction. Snape was talking to Professor Sprout on his left, which was normal. He glanced at Harry exactly once briefly and looked away, which was also normal by now. Harry had developed over 7 weeks an understanding of Snape's attention as a kind of currency the man spent carefully and without sentiment. When he looked at Harry, there was always something in it that belonged to the past, some grief or complicated accounting that Harry wasn't yet positioned to audit. He'd get there. Dumbledore, at the center of the staff table, was eating kippers and talking with great apparent contentment to Professor Flitwick, and would have looked to most observers like a man with nothing particular on his mind. Harry, who had been watching him since the first night, saw the slight tightening around the headmaster's eyes that meant he was thinking at least 2 levels below the conversation he was having. Something was on tonight. Harry couldn't have explained how he knew, but he knew. He told Ron and Hermione when they were walking to Charms. Something's happening today. Halloween something or something, Ron asked. The second kind. Hermione adjusted the books in her arms. I've been thinking about the trapdoor. About what specifically would require both that level of guard and weight. She stopped walking. A few other students divided around her like water around a stone. Harry. Last week you said the stone, the hiding of it, the timing happened after you arrived. Why would that matter? What would you have to do with what's under the trapdoor? Harry said. With why it's here. She looked at him. What if it's not that the thing needed hiding? What if it's that you needed locating? The stone is here, you're here, the person who wants the stone is here. 3 things in one place. Harry looked at her. The thing under the trapdoor is bait, he said. Not intentionally, maybe. But functionally. She was talking faster now, the way she did when the logic was catching up to itself. If you were Voldemort and you needed to really return body and power, you'd need an object of sufficient power. And you'd need Harry Potter, who destroyed you, because that destruction was magical and incomplete and the energy went somewhere. Into the scar, into Harry. She said it with the precision of someone stating a physical law. He doesn't just want the stone, he wants what you carry, the magic from that night. Harry stood in the corridor and felt the pieces of this settle into their positions with the particular click of a theory that was also a plan. He needs to come to me, Harry said. Or someone acting for him, Hermione said. Which is, Quirrell, Ron said. They both looked at him. Ron shrugged, slightly defensive. What, I've been watching him too, he's been different since the start of term. Charlie mentioned him, said Quirrell did a grand tour of Eastern Europe 2 summers ago, came back changed, different kind of nervous. He paused, and the stutter started after the trip. Before the trip he just had an accent. Harry and Hermione stared at Ron. What? Ron said again. That's brilliant, Harry said. Ron looked briefly stunned by this. Then deeply pleased. I mean, it's just observation. It's good observation. Harry started walking again. Okay, so it's Quirrell. Which means tonight, on a night when the castle is distracted and the wards are stretched thin by the holiday magic, something is going to happen. He thought for a moment. We stay together after the feast. We don't go back to the tower straight away. You want to watch, Hermione said. I want to know, Harry said. There's a difference. Charms that morning went quickly. Harry performed a switching spell that made Flitwick fall off his books for the second time in the term, which Harry was beginning to feel mildly responsible for, and also found it very difficult not to be amused by. Flitwick did not seem to mind. He had the pedagogical delight of someone who loved his subject enough to celebrate excellence even when it was inconvenient. The real event of the morning happened just before lunch. Hermione, in a moment of thorough and well-intentioned academic demonstration, informed Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown, and in the radius of a corridor, most of the surrounding first-year population, that Ron had been performing the Wingardium Leviosa wrist movement incorrectly for 2 weeks, and that the reason his feather kept spinning rather than rising was that he was swishing on the wrong beat. She said it with the complete and genuine intention of being helpful. She said it in the tone of someone so focused on the information that they'd forgotten the information was attached to a person. Ron's face did something Harry watched carefully, a flicker of the specific humiliation that comes not from the fact of being wrong but from the public architecture of the correction, the way it builds a small stage around the person corrected and leaves them on it. Ron left before Harry could say anything. Hermione didn't notice immediately. When she did, something crossed her face, not guilt exactly, not yet, but its precursor. "Was that?" she started. "Yeah," Harry said. "I was trying to, I know." She looked at the space where Ron had been. "I do that. I know I do it, I can see it happening and I still," she stopped. "Is he very upset?" "He's Ron, he goes straight rather than sideways, he'll be angry for a bit and then it'll pass." Harry looked at her. "Tell him that later, not the correction, the sorry." Hermione nodded somewhat stiffly, which was the way she accepted things that she found difficult. It was one of the things Harry liked about her, she didn't pretend things were easy that weren't. He went and found Ron in the corridor that led to the Great Hall, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of someone compiling a list of grievances in order of severity. "She's not wrong," Harry said, coming to lean next to him. "I know she's not wrong," Ron said. "That's not the, I know." They stood for a moment. "She doesn't do it to be unkind," Harry said. "She does it because the information is more real to her than the room around it, and most of the time nobody's told her that the room matters too." He paused. "You could tell her." "I'm not going to, not today, just at some point she'd want to know." "She's not someone who'd be fine with hurting people by accident." Ron looked at him sideways. "You're very good at this." "At what? People?" He said it like it was a subject area, like it's a class you've already passed. Harry thought about growing up in Smallville, in a town of 5,000 where everyone knew everyone and the social architecture was as visible as the grain elevators on the skyline, and the way Jonathan had always made him think about other people as whole persons rather than supporting characters in his own situation. "Good teacher," he said. Ron nodded. They went to lunch. The afternoon passed in the particular way of Halloween afternoons at Hogwarts, which was with increasing energy and increasingly elaborate decoration, and a castle that felt progressively less like a school and more like a place that had taken the concept of the holiday personally. Harry spent the time before the feast in the library with Hermione, who was doing research with the intensity of someone managing a feeling through productivity. She'd found 3 references to something called the Philosopher's Stone, alchemy and its applications, medieval magical history, and a pamphlet from the International Confederation of Wizards that she'd sourced through an interlibrary system Harry didn't know existed, and she was cross-referencing them with the focused energy of someone who needs to be right about something before anything happens. "The Philosopher's Stone," she said, spreading the pages out, "created by Nicholas Flamel, produces the elixir of life, extended life, possibly indefinite, and can transform any metal into gold." She looked up. "If Voldemort wanted to return to full power, a continuous supply of elixir of life would allow him to sustain a body while he rebuilt his strength. So the stone isn't just valuable," Harry said, "it's specifically what he needs. Not the only thing, but yes." She paused. "It's also, Harry, the stone is real, Flamel is real. He's over 600 years old, which is verifiable from public records." She said this with the expression of someone who finds the confirmation of extraordinary things more exciting than most people find anything. "Which means whatever is under that trapdoor is one of the most important objects in the world," Harry said, "and someone is going to try to take it tonight." She straightened the papers. "We need to get there first. We need to see what happens first," Harry said. "If we move too early, we show our hand." Hermione looked at him. "You're very calm. Would it help if I weren't?" She considered this. "No," she admitted. "Then I'll stay calm." She looked at her notes. "I'm not frightened," she said, which was true in all the ways that mattered and not quite true in one small specific way. "I'm just very aware of what we don't know." "That's the right thing to be aware of," Harry said. "It means you're paying attention." She looked at him steadily. "You do that a lot, you know." "Do what?" "Tell people when they're doing the right thing." She said it analytically, but the warmth in it was real. "It's very effective. You should know that about yourself." Harry didn't have a good answer to that, so he said nothing, which she seemed to find sufficiently satisfying. The Halloween feast was, genuinely and without exaggeration, spectacular. 1,000 bats had been joined by 1,000 pumpkins, which had been joined by suits of armor that banged spoons on shields in rhythmic percussion, and the ceiling had shifted from its usual sky simulation to something deeper and stranger, not night exactly, but the specific quality of the space between night and whatever comes after, purple, black, and infinite. The food materialized in the theatrical quantities of a meal that understood its moment. Harry ate and talked and watched the staff table. Quirrell was not eating. He was performing the motions of eating, fork to plate to mouth, plate to fork, but his eyes were elsewhere and his jaw, when Harry watched it carefully with the resolution of vision that could read newsprint from 200 feet, was not chewing. He was looking at something internal, running through something, counting down. Harry said nothing to Ron and Hermione. He kept the meal going, talked to Neville about herbology, which Neville was genuinely excellent at and which came alive when Neville talked about it in the way that all subjects come alive when someone loves them, and kept the careful watch running in the background. The feast was 40 minutes old when Quirrell stood up. Didn't run, he didn't hurry. He simply stood, said something to the professor on his left. Harry was too far to read lips at this angle and walked out of the Great Hall with the measured pace of a man going to the lavatory rather than to commit a theft. Harry put his fork down. "It's happening," he said quietly. Ron looked up from a drumstick. Hermione closed her book. "Now," Ron said. "Now." Harry was already calculating the route. 3rd floor, east corridor, the locked door, the trapdoor. Quirrell had maybe a 90-second head start. "We give him 2 minutes so he's committed, then we follow." Hermione stood up. "Wait," Harry said. He was still watching the staff table. Specifically, Dumbledore, who had not reacted to Quirrell's departure, who was still talking to Flitwick, who was doing so with the specific quality of concentration of a man who has decided not to notice something because the plan requires it. Harry filed this away. Then, something else. A smell, not from the feast, from the doors. The enormous main doors of the Great Hall, which were standing slightly open, and through which a smell was coming that was deeply wrong in the way that very old dangerous smells are wrong. The kind of wrongness that bypasses the conscious brain and speaks directly to whatever part of a person is still ancient enough to recognize predators. A troll. Harry had read about trolls. He had precisely the interest in them that he had in all dangerous things, which was thorough and practical and entirely without fear. He stood up from the bench completely and turned to face the doors. The troll came through them at speed, which was unusual. Trolls were not typically fast, but this one had been pointed, which was different from motivated. It was 12 feet tall and gray-skinned and smelled like something that had been dead for a week and hadn't realized yet, and it was carrying a club that was essentially a tree with the ambition taken out of it. The Great Hall went from feast to chaos in about 2 seconds. Students screamed and scattered. Tables overturned. Plates and cups went in every direction. Professor McGonagall's voice cut through the noise, ordering everyone to stay calm, which approximately nobody did. The troll swung its club with the random enthusiasm of something that understood impact without understanding aim, and a section of the Hufflepuff table became significantly shorter. Harry moved through the crowd in the opposite direction from everyone else. Not running, he didn't run. There was no reason to run. Nothing in this room threatened him, just moving with purpose through the current of panicking students, reaching the clear space around the troll in about 4 seconds. He stood 10 feet from it and looked at it. The troll looked at him. It swung the club. Harry caught it. He caught it the way you catch a swing door, with both hands just above the head, absorbing the force without drama. The impact of a 12-foot mountain troll at full swing against someone of Harry's physical capacity was effectively nothing. He held the club still. The troll, which had been expecting its club to complete its arc, lurched forward. The Great Hall went very quiet. Every student who had not yet made it to the doors stopped. Teachers with their wands raised held their positions. The troll looked down at Harry with the expression of something that has encountered, for the first time, a thing it cannot categorize. Harry looked up at it calmly. "There you go," he said to it, the way you talk to a spooked animal. "I've got you. Nobody needs to get hurt here." The troll made a sound like distant avalanche. It pulled on the club. Harry didn't let go. The troll pulled harder. Harry stayed exactly where he was, feet flat on the floor, no visible effort. Ron, from somewhere behind him, said very quietly, "Bloody hell." The troll swung its free hand. Harry stepped back, kept hold of the club, and let the momentum of the swing carry the troll off balance, then used its own forward movement to redirect it toward the wall. Not hard, he wasn't trying to hurt it. There was nothing this troll had done that it had chosen. It had been pointed here by a person, but firmly enough that it went down. The club came free in Harry's hands. The troll sat against the wall, making a sound of profound confusion. Harry set the club down. McGonagall had her wand up. Flitwick had his wand up. Dumbledore had appeared at the door to the hall. Harry didn't know when, didn't know if he'd been there from the start, and filed that question for later, and was standing very still, watching Harry with an expression that had abandoned its usual careful management, and was, for one unguarded moment, something like awe. "I'd recommend containing it," Harry said to McGonagall. He looked around at the hall, overturned tables, scattered food, 140 students pressed against walls and each other. Is everyone okay? A beat of complete silence. Then the hall made a noise that was part relief and part something else, the specific noise of a group of people recalibrating the world. Longbottom, Harry heard McGonagall say, somewhere to his left in a voice that was working very hard, "Are you injured?" Neville, who had apparently not evacuated, and had instead pressed himself against the back wall near the Gryffindor table, shook his head. He was looking at Harry with the expression he'd had on the flying lesson, the one that had come after the moment of being caught, the expression of someone for whom the world had just demonstrated that safety was possible in ways they hadn't previously allowed themselves to believe. Dumbledore stepped fully into the hall. He walked past overturned tables and confused professors and Quirinus Quirrell, who had Harry notice this immediately, returned to the hall. He was standing just inside the main doors, turban askew, face arranged in the expression of someone who has arrived too late to help and is appropriately distressed about it. He had not been gone long enough to have reached the third floor. Harry looked at him. Quirrell met his gaze. For exactly 1 second of turban-wearing, stuttering defense professor, his face did something else entirely. Something cold and flat and evaluating, like a door opening onto a different room. Then it closed. Harry held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he nodded slowly and looked away. So, not tonight then, a probe, an assessment, send the troll, create the distraction, watch how Harry responded, get the data on what he could do, report back. He'd just shown his hand in one direction, which meant the game had changed. He filed that away and went to help write the tables. Dumbledore came to him after. The students had been sent back to their common rooms. The troll had been contained by 6 professors working in concert and was now sedated in the courtyard. The feast remnants were being cleared by house elves. Most of the faculty were in the corridor, outside the Great Hall, discussing something in low, urgent voices. Dumbledore collected Harry the way you collect a letter you've been waiting for, with the air of someone who has been patient and finds the waiting complete. "A word, if you don't mind, Harry," he said, not a question. They walked together to a side corridor. Dumbledore's pace was unhurried, which was itself a statement. Harry waited. "That was," Dumbledore said, "extraordinary." "It was a troll," Harry said. "Yes." A pause. "For most 11-year-olds, I'm not most 11-year-olds. Number Dumbledore looked at him sideways over the half-moon spectacles. "You are considerably more than that, as I believe you have known for some time." Harry looked at him steadily. He had the particular quality of calm that came not from youth or inexperience, but from someone who had decided what they were and didn't feel the need to perform alternatives. "The troll was a distraction," Harry said. Dumbledore held his gaze. "Was it? Someone let it in. On Halloween, when the wards are at their most complex and the staff are concentrated in one place." Harry kept his voice flat, informational. "And while the distraction was running, someone was supposed to be on the 3rd floor." Silence. "You've been busy," Dumbledore said, and his voice carried something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite not surprise. "I have good friends," Harry said. "Hermione Granger is the best researcher I've ever met, which includes several adults. Ron Weasley notices things people assume he doesn't notice. And he paused. "I pay attention." Dumbledore looked at him. The calculating quality was there, always there in the deep architecture of the man, but on top of it tonight was something that seemed to be genuine and unperformed, a kind of recognition. "The person you believe responsible," Dumbledore said carefully. "Do you have evidence or inference?" "Both," Harry said. "The inference is strong, the evidence will take time." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I'm not going to the ministry, I'm not going to the prophet. I'm telling you because you placed whatever is under that trapdoor there, which means you're already aware there's a threat." He paused. "What I want to know is whether you're going to tell me what I'm dealing with." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He looked at Harry with the look of a chess player reassessing the board, not because the pieces had moved, but because he'd just discovered one of them had a different range than he'd assumed. "I placed the stone here because I believed this castle the safest location," Dumbledore said slowly. "I believed the protections sufficient, I believe they still are." A pause. "But I did not account for the possibility that someone might walk through this school for months learning its rhythms from the inside." "And me," Harry said. "And you," Dumbledore agreed quietly. "Your being here, I confess that I considered it in terms of protection. The magic your mother gave you," he stopped. "Harry, Lily Potter's sacrifice created a protection that has never been documented because nothing like it has ever happened. It lives in you. It is part of you. And you are," he chose the next word carefully, "not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Dumbledore smiled. It was, Harry thought, the first entirely unarchitected smile he'd seen from the man. "Honestly, I expected someone very like his father, brave, impulsive, talented, someone I could guide." The smile softened. "I did not expect someone who needed no guiding." Harry held his gaze. "I'm not going to be managed," he said. It wasn't hostile. It was simply fact stated with the complete clarity of someone who has never confused kindness with compliance. I'll work with you, I'd like to, you know things I need to know, and I think I can help with things you've been handling alone. He paused. But the people I trust because they're honest with me. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Voldemort, he said, is on Quirrell's head beneath the turban. What remains of him, a remnant, has been living there since Quirrell's tour of Eastern Europe. He cannot act alone, he needs the stone to restore himself. A pause. The protections beneath the trapdoor were designed to slow him, to give me time. I believed I would be aware of any serious attempt before it succeeded. And tonight was intelligence gathering, Dumbledore said, as you deduced. He looked at Harry. He now knows considerably more about you than he did this morning. Good, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. If he knows what I can do, Harry said, he has to make a decision. He can try to avoid me, which means avoiding the stone, which means he doesn't get what he needs, or he can come at me, which means I know when and where. Harry looked at the old headmaster. Either way, the initiative is mine. Dumbledore stood in the corridor and looked at Harry Kent for a full 10 seconds without speaking. Then he said, quietly and with the weight of something enormous being set down, your mother would have liked you very much. Harry felt that land in his chest in the specific way of things that are true and unexpected. Tell me about her, he said, properly, not the legend. Dumbledore looked at him, then he said, come to my office, I'll make tea. They talked for 2 hours. Not just about Lily, about James, about the war, about Godric's Hollow and what Dumbledore had known and when, and the terrible calculus of a leader who sees the whole board but cannot protect every piece. Dumbledore did not spare himself in the telling, which Harry found more valuable than any polished version would have been. He learned that his father had been arrogant and brilliant, and that the arrogance had spent down by the time Harry was born. That his mother had been the kind of magical thinker who comes once in a generation, not just powerful but inventive, willing to pursue magical theory past the places other people stopped because the thinking got difficult. That the night in Godric's Hollow, Lily had tried something that had no precedent in recorded magic and had worked in ways that nobody, including Dumbledore, had fully mapped. She fused her magic with yours, Dumbledore said. Not just a charm, a transference. Part of her magical core went into you. He looked at Harry over his tea. Which is why I suspect your abilities are what they are. You have your own core, and you have hers. And whatever your other nature provides. A pause. The combination has never existed before. And what Voldemort did, Harry said, when the curse rebounded, where did that go? Dumbledore looked at the scar. Into you, he said quietly. A fragment of him, his intent, his power at that moment, some imprint of his consciousness is carried in the scar. It is why you can do things that have no conventional magical explanation. He paused. It is also why he can sense you when his attention is focused, and why you, I suspect, can sense him. Harry thought about the off-key vibration in the castle this morning. Yes, he said. Dumbledore watched him. Does that frighten you? Harry considered the question honestly, the way he considered all questions, not looking for the brave answer or the acceptable answer but the true one. No, he said, it makes me more sure about what needs to happen. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower after midnight, through corridors full of the particular quiet of a building that has processed something large and is settling back into its rhythms. The paintings watched him go. A suit of armor near the second-floor landing moved its head as he passed, tracking him with the slow attention of something very old acknowledging something new. He gave it a nod and kept walking. Ron and Hermione were waiting in the common room. They were sitting in the chairs by the fire. Ron had clearly been asleep and had been woken by Hermione, who had clearly not been asleep and was on her second scroll of notes. They both looked at Harry when he came in. Well, Ron said. Harry sat in the third chair. He looked at the fire. Voldemort is in the castle, he said. He's been here all term. He's on Quirrell. A beat. Right, Ron said. The stone is the Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamels. You were right, Hermione. He looked at her. And it's protected by a series of challenges under the trapdoor. Dumbledore designed them. He told me what they are. Hermione straightened. He told you. He's decided to trust me. Harry paused. I've decided to trust him partially, which is enough for now. He looked at both of them. Quirrell didn't get near it tonight. The troll was reconnaissance, which means he'll try again properly soon before Dumbledore can reinforce. How soon? Hermione asked. Days, maybe less. Harry looked at the fire. He knows what I can do now. He watched tonight. And Voldemort is not patient. He's been a ghost on the back of someone's head for a decade, which means everything in him is pulling toward the finish. He'll move quickly. Ron leaned forward. So what do we do? Harry thought about the trapdoor. About the three-headed dog which he could handle. About whatever lay beneath, challenges built for ordinary wizards, for adults designed to be difficult. For him they would be different. He didn't know yet exactly how different. We prepare, Harry said. Not for tonight, but when it comes, we'll be ready. He looked at his two friends. You don't have to come, I mean that. This isn't your fight in the way it's mine. Ron looked at him with the expression of someone who finds the offer both understandable and completely irrelevant. "Shut up," Ron said, not unkindly. Hermione had already turned to a new scroll. "I've been researching the protection systems Dumbledore typically uses. Cross-referencing with known challenge architectures in historical stone vaults, I have theories about what we'll face." She looked up. "I'd like to walk you through them." Harry looked at them both. He thought about Jonathan on the back 40, show me everything, and the specific gift of being known completely by people who chose to stay. "Yeah," he said, "show me everything." Hermione spread her notes across the table, and the three of them bent their heads together in the firelight, and outside the castle the Scottish night ran deep and cold, and somewhere beneath their feet the Philosopher's Stone sat in the dark behind a locked door and a three-headed dog and a series of challenges that had been built for one kind of person entirely. They were something else entirely. The fire burned low. They kept working. And in the back of Harry's awareness, like a signal at the edge of reception, he could feel the cold, sick fragment that lived below the third floor and above the trapdoor, restless and wanting, patient only because it had no choice. It would move soon. Harry was counting on it. The next morning, Neville came down to breakfast and sat next to Harry without preamble and said, "I want to help with whatever is happening." Harry looked at him. Neville was looking at his porridge with the expression of someone who has made a decision that frightened them and has decided to lead with the decision rather than the fear, which was the bravest kind of decision Harry knew. "You sure?" Harry said. "No," Neville said honestly. "But I'm sure I want to try." Harry looked at him for a moment, at the round face and the careful hands and the specific quality of a person who was going to be remarkable, not because the remarkable thing came easily to them, but because they kept choosing it anyway despite that. "Okay," Harry said. Neville looked up, surprised he hadn't been talked out of it. "We meet in the library at 6, Harry said. "Bring your herbology notes, there might be something in there we need." Neville nodded. Then he ate his porridge with the focused composure of someone who has just committed to something and intends to be adequate to it. Across the table, Hermione watched this and said nothing. But she made a small notation on her current scroll, which Harry suspected was a revision of her planning to include a fourth person. He was right, she confirmed it when he looked over. "Neville knows plants," she said quietly. "There's very likely to be something botanical down there." "I know," Harry said. "You asked him because you knew." "I asked him because he asked me," Harry said. "The plants are a bonus." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she said, in the very precise and honest tone she used when she was saying something she found difficult to articulate, "You're good at people, Harry." Ron said the same thing. "Ron's not wrong about everything," she said, and went back to her scroll, and Harry smiled at his breakfast and said nothing because some things were true enough without requiring commentary. Chapter 5. The reason you have them 3 days after Halloween. The castle felt like a held breath. Harry noticed it in the quality of mornings, the way the light came through the great hall windows with a slightly different angle, something tighter in it, like light before a storm. He noticed it in the third-floor corridor, which he passed deliberately on his morning walks, finding the door locked each time but the air behind it carrying a specific frequency of intent that hadn't been there before. Someone had been testing the lock. Not breaking it, testing it, learning it, which was more patient and more dangerous than breaking. He noticed it in Quirrell. The professor had changed since Halloween. The turban was the same rotation, the stutter the same careful architecture, but underneath there was something that had compressed, the way a spring compresses when loaded. His eyes during meals moved faster. His hands, when he thought no one watched, were still in the way that people go still when they are concentrating on something internal and enormous. Voldemort was telling him something, or deciding something, or both. Harry sat through Defense Against the Dark Arts on the Tuesday after Halloween and watched Quirrell teach a lesson on red caps that was technically competent and completely bloodless, the lesson of someone performing a function rather than inhabiting it. He took his notes. He answered questions when called upon. He gave nothing away in his expression. But when Quirrell turned to write something on the board, Harry heard it very briefly, very faint, at the lowest edge of what even his hearing could resolve, a voice that wasn't Quirrell's. Coming from beneath the turban, 3 words, "Soon the boy." Harry kept writing. He told Hermione and Ron that evening in the library. Hermione went still over her parchment. Ron set his quill down. "Soon" meaning, Ron started. "Tonight or tomorrow," Harry said. "He's decided. He's done gathering information." He looked at both of them. "We need to be ready to move." "The challenges," Hermione said. She spread out a set of notes that had been growing for 3 days, dense and cross-referenced in 3 different colors of ink. "I've been working through everything Dumbledore told you, cross-checking against what I know about each professor's methodology. I think I have it mapped." She pointed at the top of the page. "First, Fluffy the dog." "I'll handle that," Harry said. Hermione nodded without debate, which was progress. "Second, Devil's Snare, Sprout's contribution. It responds to light and relaxation, panic feeds it, stillness weakens it. Lumos will work at a push, but pure sunlight is ideal. She tapped the next note. Third, enchanted keys Flitwicks. There'll be a correct key among hundreds and we'll need brooms to catch it. She glanced at Harry with an expression that said she'd done the math on this one already. Or not brooms in your specific case. What's after that? Neville asked. He'd had his herbology notes out and had been following along with the careful attention of someone who has promised themselves they won't fall behind. A chessboard, Hermione said. McGonagall's wizard chess life-size, you have to play across. She looked at Ron. Ron straightened in his chair. I can do that, he said, and the way he said it left no room for doubt. There was no performance in it. He simply knew that he could do it the way Harry knew how fast he was, not arrogance, just the honest accounting of what you're actually good at. I know, Harry said. Ron looked at him. You knew you'd need me for that. I knew you were the best chess player in the school. Yeah. A pause. Ron nodded, something settling in his expression. What's after the chessboard? A logic puzzle. Snape's. 6 bottles, different contents, poison, wine, the correct potion to proceed. A riddle determines which is which. Hermione looked at her notes with the quiet confidence of a person who has been waiting their whole life to be in a room with a logic puzzle. And a real purpose for solving it. I can do that. I know, Harry said. She looked at him. Obviously, she said, but she was smiling. And last, Neville asked. Mirror of Erised, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. Dumbledore told me he placed it at the end himself. It shows you what you want most. The stone is hidden inside it and can only be retrieved by someone who wants to find it but not use it. He paused. Someone who wants it for someone else or to protect people. Neville looked at the table. Then he said carefully, that would work for you. That's what Dumbledore thinks, Harry said. What do you think? Hermione asked. Harry thought about it honestly. I think Dumbledore's logic is sound and also that I'd like to not find out I'm wrong with Voldemort standing next to me. He looked at his friends. Which is why we're going to move before Quirrell does. Silence. Tonight, Ron said, not a question. Tonight, Harry confirmed. They ate dinner normally. This was harder than it sounded. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and ate shepherd's pie and talked to Seamus about Quidditch, and listened to Dean's heated defense of football against Ron's complete bafflement at the concept of a sport without brooms. And all of it was real, genuinely real. Because Harry had learned a long time ago that the way to stay calm before something large was not to pretend the thing wasn't there, but to stay fully present in what was here in front of you worth having. He watched Quirrell across the hall. Quirrell was not eating again. His hands were flat on the table. His eyes were closed. Harry set down his fork. He said, quietly enough for only Ron and Hermione to hear, he's going tonight. Now during dinner, he's leaving during dinner. Hermione's hand was under the table, already gripping her wand. Ron said with the calm of someone who had made peace with this 2 days ago. Now, Harry said. He stood. Neville. He leaned slightly toward Neville, who was 3 seats down. Stay here. If we're not back by midnight, get McGonagall. Neville looked at him with that expression, the one that was afraid and committed simultaneously. Harry, I mean it. This part is the part where you hold the position here. That's not the lesser job. If we need backup, you're the one who gets it. He held Neville's gaze until he saw the understanding land. Can you do that? Yes, Neville said solidly. Good. They left through the side entrance, walking quickly but not running, because running in corridors was noticed, and they had about 4 minutes before Quirrell's absence would become remarkable to anyone watching the staff table. They went up 2 flights before Hermione said, Quirrell didn't go up. The 3rd floor is he should have gone up. He took the east staircase, Harry said. He was watching me all through dinner without looking at me. He waited until I was eating and my attention was on Ron before he stood. A pause. He's been planning this exit for days. He's good, Ron said, not admiringly. Yes, Harry agreed. He is. They went up the east staircase. 3rd floor corridor was empty. The door at the end was ajar. A jar not open, not broken, but carefully pushed to, the way you leave a door you've passed through and don't want anyone to notice. Harry pushed it open. The 3-headed dog was asleep. All 3 heads down, 3 separate snoring rhythms, enormous flanks rising and falling in the flickering torchlight. Harry looked at the dog for a moment. Then he looked at the corner of the room where a small flute was lying on the stone floor, dropped, not placed, by someone moving quickly once the music had done its work. The trapdoor in the floor was open. Harry crouched and looked into it. Darkness below and the smell of earth and something alive and fibrous devil's snare, which meant the drop was what Hermione had described and the landing would not be clean. He looked back at the dog. It wouldn't stay asleep, not without the music. I'll go first, he said. He looked at Hermione. The snare, if it gets Ron or you, I know what to do, she said. Go, he dropped. The fall was brief. Something came rushing up in the dark, tendrils, fast and purposeful, wrapping around his arms and legs with the grip of something that knew its job. Harry felt it, genuinely felt it, the specific constrictive intelligence of a plant that had been growing for decades and knew exactly how much pressure was required. It began to tighten. Harry stood still. Not because he was calm, though he was, but because motion fed it and stillness didn't, and he'd read this and it was true. The snare held for a moment. Then, finding no panic to feed on, finding instead a resistance it had no protocol for, it began to loosen. Harry reached up and caught Hermione as she came down. The snare reached for her, found Harry's hand between itself and her wrist, and pulled back. He caught Ron next and kept them both on their feet. Light, Harry said to Hermione. Lumos Maxima, the light she produced was significant. The snare recoiled from it in every direction, pulling back to the walls and the ceiling, clearing the floor. They crossed it quickly, Harry keeping his arm across Ron's shoulders because Ron's left foot had been caught for a moment longer than the rest and the snare left a bruise on the way out. I'm fine, Ron said preemptively. I know, Harry said. Tell me when it stops hurting. It stopped already. Liar. Yeah, Ron admitted. The next chamber was enormous and lit with blue torchlight and full of the sound of wings. Thousands of winged keys circling the ceiling in a dense, chaotic flock. A single broomstick leaned against the far wall, and in the far door a keyhole. Harry walked past the broomstick. He went straight up under his own power, which was faster and more maneuverable than any broom, and moved through the flock with the precision of someone who had once run through a tornado for fun. The keys scattered and reformed around him, but not fast enough. He had the visual resolution to track a fast-moving small object at close range without effort, and the key he needed had a damaged wing from being caught before, flying slightly lopsided. He spotted it in 4 seconds, had it in 6, came back down, handed the key to Hermione, who unlocked the door. Ron said, right, next time I'll just stand here and look at the broomstick. The broomstick is there for wizards who can't do what Harry does, Hermione said. It's a perfectly reasonable challenge under normal circumstances. Under normal circumstances, I'd be dead from the troll, Ron said. They went through. The chessboard was everything Ron's expression said it was, life-size. White stone pieces against black stone pieces, each one taller than a person, each one with the specific quality of deep, patient magical animation, not alive but purposeful, which was different and somehow more unnerving. The board stretched 60 feet across the chamber. The only way through was across it. Ron stood at the edge of it and looked at it for approximately 5 seconds. Okay, he said, and it came out quiet and certain. We're the black pieces. Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, you're a castle. He studied the board. I'll be a knight. Ron, Hermione started. I need to see the whole board from the middle. Knight gets me there. He was already stepping forward, and the Black Knight's horse that was previously his piece moved aside with the gracious inevitability of something that has recognized its replacement. Ron mounted it. He looked down at them. Follow my instructions exactly. Don't move until I say. And he paused. This is going to take a little while and some of the white pieces are going to come at us, and we let them because I need to sacrifice a position to open the path. Sacrifice what position? Hermione said. Ron looked at her, then at Harry. Harry understood what he wasn't saying. Ron. It's fine, Ron said. It was the same voice he'd used to say I'm in 3 days ago, uncomplicated, committed. It's a chess move. It's the right chess move. If I make it, the king is exposed and you can get through. We can find another, Harry. Ron's voice carried something Harry hadn't heard from him before, not authority exactly, but its first cousin. Certainty. I'm the best chess player in the school. You said it. Let me do the thing I'm best at. He met Harry's eyes. Trust me. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Ron started calling moves. It was extraordinary to watch. Ron saw the board in a way Harry's vision couldn't help with, not spatially but strategically, the board as a language, each piece a word in a sentence that was building toward something. He moved them through with an efficiency that looked simple and wasn't. Calling their positions in a voice that stayed level, even when a white queen, the size of a horse, moved to cut off their flank, and Ron redirected without pausing. They were 3/4 of the way across when Ron said, Harry, Hermione, go to the left. Get ready to run when the path clears. Ron, Hermione's voice was tight. Left, go. Harry took Hermione's arm and moved left. He watched Ron rein his stone horse to the center of the board, perfectly placed, brilliantly placed, the move that exposed the White King and opened the path and put Ron directly in the path of the White Queen, which moved with the absolute purposeless of a chess piece fulfilling its function. The impact was enormous. The Queen's stone arm came across and Ron went down, horse and rider, in a crash of stone and motion, and Harry had Hermione's arm and was already moving because Ron had told him to and Ron had been right. He stopped at the edge of the board. The White King bowed. The path was open. Harry turned back. Ron was on the ground, the stone chess horse beside him, and he was conscious. Harry confirmed this immediately with the specific attention he paid to heartbeats, but still, not badly hurt. Concussed, probably. Bruised in ways that were significant but would heal, he was also grinning. Harry could see it from 30 feet away. Go, Ron said. His voice was rougher than usual but entirely himself. I'm fine, go. Harry went over to him, crouched. I told you, Ron said. I knew I could do it. Did you see the board? That was, yeah, Harry said. That was you. Ron's grin widened. I was brilliant. You were brilliant, Harry agreed, and he meant it completely, and Ron heard that and it did something to his expression that wasn't pride exactly but was the thing underneath pride, the thing that actually matters. Go get Voldemort, Ron said. Working on it. Harry stood. He looked at Hermione. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the blue torchlight. He's going to be fine, Harry said. I know, she said and straightened. The next chamber is the potions. The potions chamber smelled of stone and cold and 7 different chemicals that Harry's enhanced senses broke apart individually, cataloging them without being asked. The bottles were arranged on a table, 7 of them different colors, different shapes, a folded parchment in front. Hermione unfolded it and read it faster than Harry had seen anyone read anything. She looked up. I've got it, she said. How long? I already have it. She pointed at a small round bottle toward the left end of the row. That one gets you forward, the second from the right gets you back. She looked at Harry. There's only enough in each for one person. You go back, Harry said. Get Ron, get McGonagall. Harry, Hermione, he looked at her, not urgently, clearly. You've done everything right tonight, everything. Now I need you to go get help, because when this is done there's going to be a concussed person on a chessboard and a troll-related situation to explain, and Dumbledore needs to know what happened here regardless of how it ends. He paused. And because you're my friend and I need you somewhere safe. Hermione looked at him for a very long moment. She did not tell him to be careful, because she had the intelligence to know that careful was not the relevant variable here. She did not tell him she was worried, because she had too much respect for both of them to perform an emotion that wouldn't help. She said, come back. Obviously, Harry said. She took the second bottle from the right. She put her hand on his arm for 1 second, brief and deliberate in saying everything it needed to, and then she walked back through the fire. Harry took the small round bottle. He looked at it for a moment. Then he drank it, pushed open the final door, and walked through. The room beyond was quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of something present and waiting, the specific silence that forms around a moment before it becomes itself. There was a fire low and dark at the far wall, and in the center of the room, facing away from Harry, was Quirrell. He was standing in front of the mirror of Arist. The mirror was enormous, taller than 2 men, framed in gold with an inscription running around its top that Harry had been told about. Arist stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. It showed you your heart's desire. And in it, Harry could see from the doorway, Quirrell was looking at himself holding something. A stone. Red gold in the firelight, but his hands were empty, he couldn't get it out. It won't work, Harry said. Quirrell turned. His face was not what Harry expected, which was interesting, because Harry had expected the performance of Quirrell to have dropped entirely by this point. But there was still something of the man in it, layered beneath the rest. Someone who had been ambitious and afraid in the specific combination that makes people do catastrophic things, who had made one bad decision very thoroughly. Potter, Quirrell said, no stutter. Kent, Harry said, and walked into the room. Quirrell raised his wand. The spell he fired was a stunning hex, fast, professional, the cast of someone who had been trained well at some point before all of this. Harry stepped to the side and let it pass and kept walking. Quirrell fired again, and again. The spells came in quick succession, each one accurate, each one hitting the space where Harry had been. Harry moved through them the way he moved through everything, not frantically at all, with the unhurried precision of someone for whom speed is a direction rather than an emergency. He reached Quirrell in the time it took Quirrell to fire 4 more spells, none of which connected, and then he was close enough that the spells stopped being useful and Quirrell switched to something else. A binding curse that snapped around Harry's wrists with genuine force, chains of blue light that a normal person would not have been able to break. Harry broke them. He didn't pull dramatically. He just straightened his arms and they came apart, the magic in them dissipating against whatever he was in the specific way that most things dissipated against whatever he was, with a crackling sound and the smell of burnt air. Quirrell stepped backward until he hit the mirror. His face went through several things quickly. Then the thing that was not Quirrell settled to the surface, and when it did, the room got colder. Remarkable, said the voice that came from Quirrell's mouth but didn't belong to him. Low, sibilant, layered, a voice that had been stripped of everything human by the specific work of choosing power over personhood for 50 years. Quite remarkable. I had thought the reports were exaggerated. They weren't, Harry said. He looked at Quirrell, not at the presence behind his eyes, at Quirrell himself, at the man who was in there somewhere beneath the occupation, who had made the choice that led to this room and was now the instrument of something that did not care about him. Quirrell, Harry said, this doesn't have to go further. He cannot hear you, the voice said, not meaningfully. I'm not talking to you. A pause, the temperature dropped another degree. No, the voice said, you're talking to a man who made his choices freely, who came to me in the forests of Albania, who asked for this. Something shifted in Quirrell's face, something like the surface of water when something moves beneath it. He wanted to be significant. Everyone does in the end. I simply made the offer generous enough. You're in his head, Harry said. That's not significant, that's convenient. And yet here we stand. The voice was calm, utterly calm, with the specific calm of something that has had a very long time to practice patience. I know what you are, Harry Potter. I know what lives in your scar. A piece of the night I destroyed your parents, a piece of me, has been part of you since you were an infant, which means you and I are not so different as you'd like to believe. We're completely different, Harry said. Are you certain? Yeah, Harry said. You kill people because you think it makes you more. I do what I do because I think it makes things better. Those aren't similar positions. Idealism, the voice said. How very, it's not idealism, Harry said. It's just math. You've been afraid of dying for 50 years. You've destroyed yourself trying to prevent it. You're living in someone else's skull. He looked at Quirrell's face, at the cold thing looking out of it. I'm 11, I'm not afraid of you. That's not idealism, that's perspective. Silence. Then the voice said, quietly and with something that was not quite surprise but was its edge, give me the stone. Number, you haven't looked in the mirror. I know what I'll see, Harry said. I'll see myself giving the stone to Dumbledore, which is what I want to do with it, which is exactly how Dumbledore designed the mirror to work. He looked at Quirrell steadily. So I can take it out of the mirror whenever I'm ready. And you can't, because what you want is to use it, and the mirror knows the difference. The pause that followed was the pause of a very old and very dangerous intelligence reworking its options. Harry stepped toward the mirror. Quirrell moved, faster than a professor with a turban had any business moving, a lunge that covered the distance between them in a second, both hands reaching for Harry's throat. The grip that locked around him was not a normal man's grip. It was something enhanced, Voldemort's will channeled through Quirrell's hands. Harry let it close. And then, because this was always what was going to happen, he let the thing happen that happened when dark magic made direct contact with whatever lived in his scar. His mother's magic. He'd felt it before, never this directly, never in response to an actual attack, but he'd felt its edges in the warmth his blood ran at, in the way dark curses didn't land the way they were supposed to. What he hadn't known until this moment was that it didn't just deflect. It reflected. It turned back, not as a counter-curse. As something older than curses, something that the magic of self-sacrifice had never been designed to weaponize, but that worked in this direction anyway, like how water doesn't mean to carve canyons but does. Where Quirrell's hands touched Harry's skin, the skin burned, not Harry's, Quirrell's. The professor cried out and pulled back and stared at his palms, where the skin was cracking, blistering, going wrong the way dark things go when they touch something that love made. Harry stood completely still and watched. Quirrell tried again. Both hands, wrist to shoulder, and each contact produced the same result, pain, damage, Quirrell's body, rejecting what it was being asked to do with the complete protest of flesh that did not want to touch what Harry was made of. Voldemort's voice came now from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating in the chamber, the control over Quirrell's body going ragged at the edges. Fool, you are a fool, touch him. I'm trying, Quirrell gasped, and Harry heard in that gasp the authentic sound of the man underneath, not the cold instrument, just a frightened person at the end of the road they'd chosen. I'm trying, master, then let me. The temperature went absolute, every candle in the chamber died. Something pushed forward through Quirrell's body, through it, in the way a hand pushes through fabric, and the face that appeared above the turban's binding was not Quirrell's. Barely a face at all. Barely anything at all. Flat, red-eyed something that had been stripped down to its intent. You, it said, not to Harry, at him. Harry looked at it without flinching. He felt his scar ignite, not with pain, with energy, the specific charge of the fragment inside him responding to the original it had come from, the two pieces of the same broken knight finally in proximity, 11 years of separation snapping into resolution. It hurt. He kept his face level. You killed my parents, Harry said. Yes, the thing said, simply, flatly, as fact. And you've spent 11 years as a ghost in other people's lives trying to come back. Harry held its red gaze. How's that been for you? The thing moved. Not forward, sideways, laterally, and Harry tracked it without looking at it, because the thing about having all his senses was that he didn't lose someone just because they moved outside his eyeline. He turned with it. It stopped. You're not afraid, it said. Number, you should be. Probably, Harry said, but I'm not. And I think that's the actual problem, isn't it? Everyone's afraid of Voldemort. That's what makes you work. That's what makes the magic of your name function, what makes people flinch. You run on fear, he paused, and I'm not supplying any. The thing in Quirrell's face went still, very still. Then I'll take what I need, it said. It came at Harry, not Quirrell's body but the fragment itself, the piece of Voldemort's soul that had been riding Quirrell for a year, tearing itself free with the specific violence of something that no longer cared about its host. It hit Harry like a cold wave, and Harry caught it, not with his hands. With everything, the whole accumulated self of him, The Kryptonian physics and his mother's love magic and the piece of Voldemort that had been part of him since the night in the nursery, and which recognized the original from which it came, the way a river recognizes the rain. He wrapped the thing in all of it and held it. And then he did what the mirror had promised he could do. He reached into it with his free hand and took the stone out. It was small, warm, red like something living. He held it in his palm and looked at it. Then he looked at Quirrell, who had collapsed to his knees, the back of his head no longer moving the way it had been, the cold presence vacated, just a man, pale and shaking and profoundly alone. "Quirrell," Harry said. Quirrell looked up at him. His eyes, unclouded for the first time all year, were simply terrified and completely lost. "It's over," Harry said. Quirrell opened his mouth, and then Dumbledore came through the door. He came fast, not running, but moving with the urgency of a man who has realized timing mattered and arrived exactly at the edge of it. His eyes went to Harry first, then the stone in Harry's hand, then Quirrell on the floor, then the air of the chamber, which had the specific quality of a room where something enormous had just finished happening. He looked at Harry. Harry held up the stone. Something broke open in Dumbledore's face, not the polished version, not the managed version. The actual thing underneath. Relief so large it had to be very old. He crossed the room and took the stone from Harry's hand with both of his carefully. He stood holding it for a moment with the expression of someone holding something that other people died for. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. He looked at Quirrell. He looked back at Harry. "The fragment gone," Harry said. "Dispersed, I don't know where, not here." He paused. "Not gone forever. He'll find a way to be somewhere, but not here, not tonight." Dumbledore closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he was composed again, though the composure was softer than usual, less armored. "Harry," he said. "How?" Harry looked at the center of the room where the air was just air again. "My mum's magic," he said. "Whatever she put in me that night, it doesn't just protect me." He paused. "It unmakes dark things or pushes them backward. It's not a weapon, it's just what it is, what she made it be." Dumbledore was quiet. "Lily," he said softly, not to Harry, just the name, out into the room like placing something down carefully. Harry looked at the mirror. In it, he could see himself, just himself, standing in a room with a stone-shaped absence in his hand, looking like someone who has just done a thing and is working out what comes next. No Voldemort, no fragment, just him. He looked quite normal, all things considered. He woke up in the hospital wing. He hadn't lost consciousness, he was certain of that. He'd walked to the hospital wing under his own power and sat down on a bed, and then somewhere between sitting and lying down, he'd simply gone away for a while, the way systems do after long and sustained effort finally relents. Not injury, decompression. The room was full of afternoon light. Ron was in the bed to his left, awake, eating an enormous box of chocolate frogs with the focused application of someone with a medical mandate to consume sugar. His left arm was in a sling, and he had a bruise along his jaw that had gone the specific purple-green of something serious that was healing. Hermione was in the chair between them reading a book, which she set down the moment Harry's eyes opened. "About time," she said. "How long?" Harry said. "Day and a half." She closed the book. "You're fine." Madame Pomfrey checked everything 4 times, and the last 2 times were for her own reassurance rather than medical necessity. Harry sat up. The room was steady. "Ron," Harry said. "Still brilliant," Ron said, around a chocolate frog. "The chess, I mean, I've been thinking about it." Move 14 was particularly... It was exceptional, Harry said. Ron stopped talking and looked at him. Then he looked at his chocolate frog, then he ate it. "McGonagall cried," he said. "When Hermione came back up, she didn't show it, but I could tell." "I wasn't there," Harry said. "Hermione told me." Harry looked at Hermione. "You okay?" "Perfectly fine," she said. "Then I was very worried." "I know, I don't like waiting." "I know," Harry said again gently. She straightened her book. "I've been compiling notes on the chamber below. The magical architecture is extremely sophisticated. The combination of the 5 professors' individual approaches created a layering effect that..." She stopped. "I'm doing it again, aren't I, the information thing," Ron said. "Yeah. I'm trying to tell you I've been thinking about you obsessively for 36 hours, and this is how I do that," she said, with the directness of someone who has decided something. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. "That's actually lovely, Hermione," Harry said. She opened her book again briskly. "Don't tell anyone." Dumbledore came that evening. He brought lemon drops, which he offered to all 3 of them without irony. He sat in the chair at the foot of Harry's bed and folded his hands and looked at the 3 of them with an expression that had none of his usual careful management in it. "Quirinus Quirrell died this morning," he said. The room was quiet. "Not from anything Harry did," Dumbledore said. "From the year of it, of carrying what he carried, the body doesn't, it was not survivable regardless of last night." Harry thought of Quirrell's eyes in those final moments, unclouded and lost. He let himself feel that for a moment, not guilt, he hadn't killed the man, but the specific sorrow of a life that had gone catastrophically wrong from a single catastrophic choice. "And Voldemort," Hermione said. "Dispersed," Dumbledore said. He looked at Harry. "As you said, gone from here, alive in whatever diminished sense applies, he is persistent if nothing else." He paused. "But set back, years likely. He requires a host, a plan, an opportunity, all of that must be rebuilt." He looked at his hands. "You have given us time." Ron said. Dumbledore looked at him. "We gave you time," Ron said. "Harry and Hermione and me, and Neville, who apparently told McGonagall in exactly the right way at exactly the right moment." He said this without aggression, as information, as accurate accounting. "Yes," Dumbledore said with complete and simple honesty. "You did," Ron nodded. "Ate a lemon drop," Dumbledore looked at Harry. "The stone," he said, "has been returned to Nicholas Flamel. He and his wife have decided." He paused. "They have decided it is time. The stone will be destroyed. They have lived long enough and chosen to end it." Harry was quiet. 600 years of life ended by choice. There was something in that, the specific bravery of deciding your time is over when you've had more time than anyone. He didn't say this out loud. "Harry," Dumbledore said more quietly, "I owe you an apology." Harry looked at him. "I placed you in this position by placing that stone in this building, by not telling you the truth of the situation when you arrived. By managing when I should have trusted." He held Harry's gaze. "I told myself I was protecting you. I think I was protecting my plan. There is a difference, and you deserve to know that I know it." The room was quiet again. "I know," Harry said, "and I'm not angry about it." He paused. "But I meant what I said in the corridor. I won't be managed. If you want to work together, really work together, it means the truth all the time, even when it's inconvenient." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Agreed," he said, and the word had the weight of a genuine agreement, not a performance of one. Harry nodded. They sat in the quiet for a moment that was not uncomfortable. "There's more, isn't there?" Harry said. "Things in my history, things about that night, things about the scar." He looked at Dumbledore. "Not tonight, but there are things you know that I need to know." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Next year," Harry said. "All of it." "Next year," Dumbledore agreed. He wrote to the Kents that night, sitting up in his hospital bed with Archimedes settled on the headboard, making small sounds of professional critique at his handwriting. "Mum, Dad, I'm okay. I'll tell you everything when I'm home. It's a long story and I want to tell it properly with pie at the kitchen table." The short version, there was something dark in the castle trying to come back to life, and it's not doing that anymore, and everyone I care about is all right. Ron was brilliant, Hermione was brilliant, Neville did exactly the right thing, and he stopped. Looked out the window at the Scottish evening. The mountains going dark blue at the edges, the loch very still. He thought about his mother in the moving photograph, waving with her whole arm, delighted. He thought about Jonathan saying, "You're my son," and meaning it from the center of everything. He thought about what Dumbledore had said, "You've given us time, and I did what I could do," he wrote, "which is what you always told me to do. I'll be home on June 30th. I'll eat whatever you make. Love, Harry." He paused. Looked at Archimedes. Looked back at the letter. "P.S. I caught the snitch in my first Quidditch match last week. Gryffindor won the House Cup. I'll explain the snitch to Dad. It's basically a very small, fast thing, which he'll understand. P.P.S. Hermione says hi. She doesn't know she's saying hi, but she would if she knew I was writing this." He folded it and gave it to Archimedes, who took it with the dignity of a bird that had been doing important work all year and knew it. The end-of-year feast was golden and enormous and full of the noise of an entire school releasing the pressure of a long year all at once. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and ate and laughed, and listened to Ron give a blow-by-blow account of the chess match to every Gryffindor who would sit still long enough to hear it, which was most of them, and watched the account grow modestly in detail with each retelling, which Harry found completely fair given what it had actually cost. Neville was across the table, laughing at something Hermione had said, and when his eyes caught Harry's, he gave a small nod that said everything a nod can say when the person giving it knows they did the right thing at the right moment and has settled it with themselves. Harry nodded back. Gryffindor won the House Cup, which Dumbledore announced with the specific pleasure of someone who has been looking forward to this particular announcement, and the Gryffindor table made a noise that Harry felt in his chest like something warm and loud and alive. Draco Malfoy from across the hall looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Draco held the look for a moment, then he looked away. But he hadn't looked away in contempt or defeat. He'd looked away in the manner of someone who has decided to think about something more carefully before speaking, which was new, and which Harry thought was enough for now. People took longer than 1 year to become different than what they were made to be. That was fine, Harry had time. He had, in fact, all the time in the world. The train back to London ran south through mountains that had gone fully green with June, the sky enormous and unhurried above them, everything bright. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and they talked about the summer, about next year, about Quidditch and exams, and whether it was possible to sneak a practical transfiguration session past McGonagall, which Hermione thought was extremely possible and Ron thought was suicidal, and which Harry thought sounded genuinely interesting. Somewhere past Perth, the compartment went quiet in the comfortable way of four people who don't need to fill every silence. Ron had fallen asleep again. Neville was reading a book about Tibetan magical plants with the specific contentment of someone doing exactly what they want to be doing. Hermione was writing in a notebook, occasionally looking out the window with an expression that was part satisfaction and part anticipation, the expression of someone who has finished one thing and can see the shape of the next one waiting. Harry watched England come up green and rolling and summerlit outside the window. He thought about the year behind him, the castle, the challenges, the chambers, the troll and the chess board and the room with the mirror, Quirrell and his terrible choice, Voldemort and his terrible persistence, Dumbledore and his complicated and slowly opening honesty. He thought about Ron's face saying I was brilliant. He thought about Hermione saying I was very worried and meaning it as a declaration. He thought about Neville steady at the entrance to the hospital wing waiting for them to come back. He thought about what he had. He had two worlds. He had Smallville and Hogwarts. He had Jonathan and Martha and Ron and Hermione and Neville and the Weasley family and a headmaster who was learning to tell the truth and a potions professor who had loved his mother and hadn't figured out what to do with that yet. And a castle that recognized something in him and vibrated when he walked its halls. He had a scar that carried history and magic he was still learning to understand. He had a destiny that someone had written for him and which he had looked at and chosen to honor in his own terms on his own timeline for his own reasons. He had powers that could reshape the world and parents who had taught him what to reshape it toward. He had an enemy who was not finished. He'd always known that. Voldemort was out there, diminished and dispersed and furious, finding his way back the way water found cracks, patient and inevitable. Next year would bring something new, the year after something newer. Harry Kent was not afraid of next year, he was honestly looking forward to it. The train came south through England and the sun came in sideways through the window and landed warm and golden on his face. And he let it, the way he always did, turned toward it without thinking, absorbing it in the way that was his specifically, filling up in the deep cellular way that kept him what he was. There were things he still didn't know. About his mother's full magic and what it had given him. About the piece of Voldemort's soul the scar had carried and what its dispersal had changed in him. About Dumbledore's full understanding of what had happened in Godric's Hollow and what it meant for what came next. He'd find out. He always found out. He was patient in the specific way of someone who has never had to hurry because they've always trusted they'd get where they needed to go. Outside London, he could see the city opening up in every direction, enormous and layered and loud. And he sat up straighter in his seat because in an hour he'd walk through a barrier and find his parents on the other side of it. He'd already written to tell them approximately what time. He knew without being able to see it yet that Martha was making something, that Jonathan was pretending not to watch the arrival board, that they'd both been doing the specific kind of not worrying that involved doing everything except the worrying. He'd have a lot to tell them. He'd tell all of it. The train came into King's Cross and slowed and stopped, and the platform was loud with the first rush of students and families and owls and all the cheerful collision of people who have been apart and are not anymore, and Harry stood and took his trunk down with one hand and tucked Archimedes under his arm and looked at Ron and Hermione. Next year, he said. Next year, Hermione confirmed. Ron stuck out his hand. Harry shook it. Then Harry pulled him in and Ron made a sound of protest and hugged him back and then pretended he hadn't. Don't be unbearable about the scar thing over the summer, Ron said. Whatever fan mail arrives, just don't let it go to your head. I haven't answered a single piece of fan mail. Good, keep that up. He picked up his trunk. My mum wants you to come to the Burrow before September. Tell her yes, Ron grinned. Then he was gone, pulled toward the barrier by the magnetic force of a large family on the other side. Hermione hugged him with the efficiency of someone who has decided hugging is practical and is going to do it well. Right, she said, weakly. I know, I'll write more than weakly. I know, Harry said. She went through the barrier. Harry stood on the platform for one moment in the noise and the steam and the particular beautiful chaos of an ending that was also the middle of something. Then he walked through the barrier. The Muggle side of King's Cross was loud and ordinary and completely itself, and there, standing by the arrival board, Jonathan with his hands in his pockets and Martha already scanning the crowd, were the Kents. Martha saw him first. She always did. She was across the concourse in about 15 seconds, and then her arms were around him and her hand was on the back of his head the way it had been since he was small, and she smelled like the kitchen and the farm and home in the specific compound way of that word when it means everything it's supposed to mean. "Hi, Mum," Harry said. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. Jonathan got there a few seconds behind and put his hand on Harry's shoulder and squeezed once, the way he always did, and that was all the language that was necessary for what it said. They walked out of King's Cross together, all three of them, into the June afternoon, and Harry felt both worlds, the one he'd grown up in and the one he'd been born to, sitting in him with the comfortable weight of things that fit. He had a whole summer ahead. He had a letter to write to Nicholas Flamel, who had 600 years of magical knowledge Harry would very much like to understand. He had Dumbledore's promised honesty to collect next September. He had a defense professor vacancy to watch being filled, and a mystery about his scar to keep excavating, and a return journey on the Hogwarts Express to eventually take that would start everything again. He had Ron's chess instincts and Hermione's research and Neville's particular brand of quiet courage. He had his mother's magic in his blood. He had his father's truck, which he'd missed, and Martha's kitchen, which he'd missed more. He had everything he needed, and some things he hadn't known he needed until he'd found them. Harry Clark Kent walked into a London summer with his family, and he was not afraid of anything, and the world, both of them, was entirely, exactly, gloriously open.